Chapter 33:19. Thinking quickly, Tang Sheng relaxed. On the other side, Kang Mo smiled bitterly. Since you are from Spirit Beast Island, then this Kang was wrong this time. I hope Brother Li and Miss Ju Feng can forgive me. Although he was a fake emperor, he was not a pedantic person. In the current situation, he was no longer at his peak. Yang Kai still had that evil spirit by his side, and even Li Wuyi and Ju Feng had rushed over. In any case, it was impossible to do anything to Yang Kai this time, so he readily admitted his mistake and humbled himself, giving Spirit Beast Island enough face. He had no choice but to give face. Martial Beast was not someone he could provoke. Although he was a member of the Star Court was controlled by the 10 great emperors in rotation. Maybe one day he would be working under Martial Beast. Li Wuyi nodded and said, "Fortunately, nothing serious happened." Although Kang Mo and Yang Kai both looked very embarrassed and their injuries were not light, neither of them was in mortal danger, which was a blessing in disguise. It was just that he couldn't figure out why Kang Mo would find trouble with Yang Kai. Kang Mo's previous words of killing and robbing undoubtedly showed that Yang Kai had something on him that Kang Mo coveted. Li Wuyi looked at the mountains and rivers bell in Yang Kai's hand and vaguely understood something. He wondered if this mountains and rivers bell had caused trouble for Yang Kai. However, this guy was also amazing. He could actually fight with Kang Mo and not die. The last time he met him on Dragon Island, Li Wuyi felt that this boy was a bit bold, daring to enter the tiger's den with his weak cultivation. It was the same this time. This boy was even more troublesome than he was when he was young. It was just that he didn't know if this matter could be resolved peacefully. Just as he was thinking this, he heard Yang Kai suddenly ask, "Brother Li, do you know this guy?" Li Wuyi nodded and said, "I've known him for a long time." Yang Kai gently nodded. "Then Brother Li, you have to keep your eyes open when you make friends in the future. Some people may know a person for a long time, but not their true nature. They are used to using despicable and shameless tricks. Who knows when they will be tricked?" Kang Mo's face turned cold. Being ridiculed by Yang Kai like this in his face was not good, but he did not want to defend himself. Li Wuyi's expression was also embarrassed. He realized that he really shouldn't have come here today. Now that he was caught in the middle, he couldn't help but glare at the flashy old man in annoyance. If it weren't for him, he wouldn't have followed them all the way here. Yang Kai's expression turned solemn as he said in a low voice, "If I want to kill him, will Big Brother Li help me or him?" Li Wuyi pondered for a moment and said, "If you insist, then this Li can only watch from the sidelines." Yang Kai could be considered as half a person from the Spirit Beast Island and had some friendship with Kang Mo. If the two of them were to engage in a life and death battle, he couldn't help either of them and could only choose to stay out of it. Of course, it would be best to turn today's matter into a small one, and then a small one into nothing. However, when he saw the murderous look on Yang Kai's face, he knew that persuading him at this time would probably be of no use. He might as well directly express his attitude. "Good," Yang Kai said in a low voice and grinned hideously. "Big Brother Li's words are enough." Li Wuyi was stunned when he heard this. He thought to himself, "Does this brat think that I will help Kang Mo? Is that why he used words to block me? But with his current strength, how can he kill Kang Mo?" Yang Kai's expression was cold and stern. He turned his head to look at the flashy old man standing beside him. The old man looked as if he didn't notice and kept his head down. The corner of Yang Kai's mouth twitched. He couldn't count on this old man. Although he didn't know why the old man would seek his protection, he had clearly said that it would be difficult to kill Kang Mo and that he wouldn't want to provoke the Iron Blood Great Emperor. If Li Wuyi asked the old man to accompany him to kill a fake emperor for no reason, the old man would most likely refuse. It would be impossible to kill Kang Mo with just him and the Dharmakaya. Kai Yang let out a long sigh in his heart. He was somewhat unwilling to let go of such a good opportunity, but since things had already gotten to this point, he didn't want to continue pestering him. Changing the topic, he said, "Since Big Brother Li has a good relationship with this person, then today I will give Big Brother Li face and let him live. Cherish him, old dog." Kang Mo's face was gloomy. He was so angry that he laughed. "Let me live. You talk big. Aren't you afraid of biting your tongue?" Yang Kai's expression turned ruthless. If you want to die, I can fulfill your wish. Kang Mo still wanted to say something, but Li Wui suddenly said, Brother Kang, no matter who is right or wrong today, let's stop here. Since Yang Kai had the intention to turn big issues into small ones and small ones into nothing, how could Li Wui stand by and watch the two sides fight again? Both sides stopping was also the outcome he wanted to see the most. Yang Kai was young and impetuous, so it was difficult to persuade him. Kang Mo was different. He understood the principle of enduring for a while and calming the waves. So he didn't persuade Yang Kai, but went to persuade Kang Mo instead. Kang Mo really gave him face, or rather, he took advantage of the situation and nodded. Since Brother Li said so, I won't argue with him. After a pause, he clasped his fist and said, It's not convenient today. I'll visit Brother Li and Miss Jiufeng at Lingshou Island another day. I'll take my leave first. As he spoke, his figure flickered and shot into the distance. He didn't want to stay for a moment longer. Not far away, the pale Wu Heng saw that he was leaving and hurriedly chased after him. As soon as he appeared, he was hit by the flowing time Great Emperor that Yang Kai had planned for a long time. The principles of time kept eroding him and he had been using his power to resist. Later, when Yang Kai and the Dharmakaya joined forces to fight, Kang Mo couldn't care about him and he couldn't intervene. He had been watching the battle from a distance and only now did he make a move. But even if he wanted to leave, he might not be able to do so. He only felt a flash in front of his eyes and a huge monster suddenly appeared in front of him, blocking the light above his head. A huge shadow completely covered him. Looking up, he saw Yang Kai's 300-foot-tall dragon body standing there, looking down at him with a sarcastic smile, which made him shudder. What do you want to do? Wu Heng was shocked and stepped back in fear. Behind him, there was another fierce breath approaching. Wu Heng didn't need to look to know that it was the Holy Spirit Stonefire. He was attacked from the front and back, and he definitely couldn't resist. He had just witnessed the battle between Yang Kai and the Dharmakaya from the beginning to the end, so he knew that he was definitely not the opponent of these two monsters. In fear, even the will to resist was extremely weak. He shouted, Master, save me. Even if God comes, he won't be able to save you. Yang Kai snorted coldly. Today, he had no choice but to let Kang Mo go. It could be said that he was forced by the situation, or it could be said that he was not strong enough. There was no way that Kang Mo could leave, and revenge could only be dealt with in the future. But if he let Wu Heng go again, Yang Kai would be happy no matter what. Tracing back to the source, this person was the chief culprit. If he didn't want to devour the Heng Luo starfield back then, how could the star territory be poisoned by the cultivator in the territory of the Great Wilderness Star, leading to the suffering of countless cultivation stars? Similarly, if it wasn't for him, he wouldn't have become enemies with Kang Mo. Yang Kai wanted to kill him back in the star territory, but he didn't have the chance at that time. Now that the chance was in front of him, how could Yang Kai miss it? As he spoke, the dragon claw reached out to grab him. Wu Heng raised his hand in fear and hit the dragon claw with a huge palm print. Although the dragon claw paused slightly, it still couldn't prevent the fate of being grabbed. As the space principles fluctuated, a black light flashed and Wu Heng disappeared. Stop! It was not until this time that Kang Mo's angry shout came, but it was obviously too late. Wu Heng had already been taken into the sealed world bead by Yang Kai, so what was the point of shouting? Kang Mo, who was about to escape, turned around at this moment and looked at Yang Kai indifferently. What did you do to him? He was a little suspicious that Wu Heng was not dead because he knew that Yang Kai had a self-contained artifact in his hand, and the biggest goal of his trip was that artifact. From what he saw in front of him, it was likely that Wu Heng had been taken into that artifact. What does it have to do with you? Yang Kai smiled arrogantly. Are you going to leave or not? If you don't, you can stay here forever. Kang Mo glared at him coldly, knowing that it was impossible for him to take Wu Heng back from Kai Yang's hands, unless he could defeat him. But this was obviously impossible, so he nodded gloomily and said, Mountains and rivers will meet again, we will meet again soon. Yang Kai grinned meaningfully. I look forward to that day. Kang Mo's lips curled into a grin as a meaningful look flashed across his eyes. Turning around, he flew off into the distance, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Yang Kai frowned, vaguely feeling that letting Kang Mo leave today was an extremely wrong decision, but he couldn't understand why he had such a feeling. But then again, he really didn't have the ability to keep Kang Mo here. A great battle, one unforeseen event after another, had finally come to an end. Inside Heavenly Wolf Valley, the spectators felt a wave of exhaustion wash over them. Although they did not participate in the battle, the various dazzling changes had caused them to feel tense and their spiritual energy consumption was enormous. Even at this moment, everyone still had a feeling in their hearts. That was, in the next moment, some other master might appear. This kind of thing didn't happen in the end. Yang Kai and the embodiment both returned to their original size. Ju Feng looked at the demonic war hammer in the embodiment's hand in amazement. "Little Yang, where did you find this thing? Why does this thing look like a demonic weapon?" Yang Kai laughed. "Big sister Ju Feng has sharp eyes. This is indeed a demonic weapon." "It's really a demonic weapon?" Ju Feng's expression changed. Yang Kai said, "Don't worry, this thing can't harm anyone." As he spoke, he put the embodiment and the demonic war hammer into the sealed world bead, obviously not wanting to talk about this matter. Ju Feng's beautiful eyes flashed, and just as she was about to remind them, she heard Yang Kai say, "Please wait a moment, let this little brother deal with the spoils of war." The Emperor realm had suffered many casualties in this battle, and the two top sects in the Eastern Territory were almost completely wiped out. Even if there were still survivors, they had suffered heavy losses. More than 30 space rings from the Emperor realm, including the space rings of Fu Bo and Shu Changfeng, were naturally rich in storage. Although Yang Kai was now rich, it was impossible for him to not want the spoils of war. Chapter 33:20. After saying that, he dragged his injured body and rushed into the battlefield. Most of the cultivators from the Emperor realm had already died, and those who were still alive were struggling at death's door. Yang Kai didn't care if they were dead or not, he killed them all with a single palm strike. Even Fu Bo and Shu Changfeng were no exception. Fu Bo had been suppressed by Yang Kai with the Mountains and Rivers Bell, and then attacked by Yang Kai with the power of the Mountains and Rivers Bell, instantly knocking him unconscious and seriously injuring him. If that was all, it wouldn't be a big problem. The key point was that the shocking battle between Yang Kai's embodiment and Kang Mo had spread far and wide. Fu Bo, who was unconscious, was almost at the center of the battlefield, so naturally, he wasn't spared. Especially when Kang Mo summoned lightning from the ninth heaven, Fu Bo had been struck countless times. While unconscious, he had no way of defending himself, so he was left half dead. At this moment, Yang Kai had given him a release. Shu Changfeng's situation wasn't much better than Fu Bo's. In fact, he was even more miserable. When he fought with the embodiment alone, he was beaten to the point where he couldn't fight back. Then, he was ambushed by Yang Kai's moon blade and was immediately seriously injured. When Yang Kai found him, he was already on the verge of death. If it weren't for his foundation as a third-layer Emperor Realm Master, he would have died long ago. Of course, Yang Kai had also given him a quick death. Seeing him busy over there, Li Wuyi sighed, "After today, I'm afraid the situation in the Eastern Territory will change." More than 30 cultivators from the Emperor Realm, including Fu Bo and Shu Changfeng, had died. The two top forces were almost crippled. For so many years, although Netherworld Sect and Brahma Holy Land were famous and domineering in the name of top forces, they had also provoked many enemies. If news of the sect's elders being killed in a single battle spread out, the sects and families that were previously suppressed by the two great forces would naturally rise up and take advantage of the situation to counterattack. Putting everything else aside, just the Ahan Palace alone was enough to tempt him. After all, they had already lost two of the three major powers. In the entire eastern region, aside from the Spectral Soul Palace, the Ahan Palace was the leader of the eastern region. Ju Feng said, "This kid is really ruthless. He didn't even frown after killing so many people from the Emperor realm in one go. It was clear that he was filled with killing intent. His little princess had developed feelings for such a person. He didn't know if it would be a blessing or a curse in the future." Li Wuyi smiled faintly and said, "On the path of martial arts, who doesn't kill all the way? It's either kill or be killed. No one is an exception." Ju Feng glanced at him. It sounds very touching. Li Wuyi fell silent as he recalled some things from his youth. Although he was gentle and refined now, he was also murderous when he was young. Fortunately, Tang Sheng, Qian Xiuying, Kai Gui and the others flew over. The famous Li Wuyi and 9 Phoenix had come here together. As the host, since Tang Sheng had seen them, he naturally couldn't pretend not to know. No matter what, he had to come and pay a visit. Even someone as arrogant as Kai Gui had to be respectful in front of Li Wuyi and Zhu Feng. The two of them didn't put on any airs and chatted casually with Tang Sheng and the others, making them feel flattered. Not long after, Yang Kai walked over, covered in blood. Lan He and Ling Yin-chin immediately went up to greet him. Lan He asked nervously, "Are your injuries serious?" "Are they serious?" Yang Kai grinned, "I'm fine, I won't die." Ling Yin-chin asked, "Why are you so reckless?" Yang Kai said, "With a knife on my neck, I could only fight back." Lan He's expression was gloomy. "Brother Yang." Before Yang Kai raised his hand to stop her. "Miss Lan, you don't have to worry about it. I understand your situation, and you couldn't help in the previous battle." It wasn't that Yang Kai was looking down on her, but in a battle of that level, a First-Order Emperor Realm Master really couldn't help. "Let's go back to my place and rest first. You need to wash off the blood on your body, otherwise, you won't be able to see anyone." Ling Yin-chin tried to smooth things over. At that moment, Tang Sheng also invited Li Wuyi and Zhu Feng to Heavenly Wolf Valley as guests. After all, they were at his doorstep, so it would be rude not to invite them. Hearing this, Yang Kai looked at Li Wuyi and said, "I was going to Spirit Beast Island to discuss some cultivation matters with Big Brother Li in the Eastern Territory, but unfortunately, we met here. If Big Brother Li isn't in a hurry, why don't we go together?" He really needed to rest, but he didn't want to miss a meeting with Li Wuyi, so he took the initiative to ask. Lan He and Tang Sheng couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief when they heard this. Since Yang Kai could say such a thing, it meant that he really didn't care much about Heavenly Wolf Valley's attitude towards him before. Otherwise, he wouldn't be willing to return to Heavenly Wolf Valley to rest. Li Wuyi pondered for a moment before saying, "This Li came here mainly for him." Saying so, Yang Kai turned his eyes towards the flashy old man. This old man had been standing there motionless, but his pair of eyes were fixed on Yang Kai, as if he was staring at a flower growing on his body. At this moment, hearing Li Wuyi say this, the old man chuckled and said, "Li Wuyi, if you want this old master to go back to Spirit Beast Island with you, you'll have to ask my young master first." Yang Kai tilted his head and looked at him. "Is there something wrong with your head?" At this time, he was still calling him young master. What was he trying to do? The old man's expression turned solemn. "Young master, this old master's mind is very clear. How could there be something wrong with my head?" Yang Kai was so angry that he laughed. "You want to recognize me as your young master? Fine, go chase after Kang Mo now and bring his head back to me." The old man's expression twitched and he smiled apologetically. "Young master, please don't make things difficult for this old master. This matter is really..." Yang Kai spread his hands at Li Wuyi and said, "I don't know what's wrong with this old man. Big Brother Li, you can do whatever you want." As soon as this was said, the flashy old man suddenly showed a pained expression. "Young master, how can you be so heartless?" Yang Kai said angrily, "You and I don't know each other. Can you please figure out the situation?" Li Wuyi smiled slightly. "If we really want to talk about it, Yang Kai, you should know him, and he might not call you young master for no reason." Yang Kai was stunned. "What do you mean?" If it was only the flashy old man who said this, it would be fine, but if Li Wuyi also said this, then it was somewhat thought-provoking. Yang Kai was a little confused. Li Wuyi waved his hand and said, "What do you mean? You can ask him yourself, but before this matter is confirmed, don't even think about escaping. You also know that since you have been targeted by me, I can find you even if you run to the ends of the earth." The tone of these words was arrogant. Since the flashy old man could beat up Kang Mo, his strength was naturally not to be underestimated. At the very least, he was at Kang Mo's level, and he was a saint spirit venerable. However, when Li Wuyi said this, he could not refute. Because he knew that if he was targeted by Li Wuyi, he really could not escape. Shaking his head, he said, "Since I have met the young master, This old master naturally has to follow by his side and serve him faithfully. How can I run away? Li Wu Yi, don't judge a gentleman with the heart of a villain. That would be for the best. Li Wu Yi gently nodded. In that case, I will have to trouble Valley Master Tang. Tang Sheng was overjoyed. Not at all, not at all. It is an honor for Master to visit Heavenly Wolf Valley. Please come in. As he spoke, he gestured with his hand. Li Wu Yi and Zhu Feng walked in front without hesitation. Yang Kai glanced sideways at the flashy old man. The old man immediately smiled and said, "Young master, please." Yang Kai nodded and strode forward with his head held high. When he passed by Kai Gui, he suddenly reached out and patted him on the shoulder. "I want half of the things in the sect vaults of Netherworld Sect and Brahma Holy Land. I will go to your Ahan temple to collect them later. Don't forget to inform your temple master." Kai Gui stared at him. Although these words were inexplicable, he instantly understood what Yang Kai meant. The two great sects were already ruined, and their elders were all gone. Even if there were still people from the Emperor realm left in the sect, there were definitely not many of them. In such a situation, the two great sects were doomed to decline. In the face of such a huge profit, it was impossible for a Han temple not to take action. In other words, the wealth accumulated over the years by Netherworld Sect and Brahma Holy Land would eventually fall into the pockets of a Han temple. At this moment, Kai Gui was already considering rushing back to a Han temple to report what happened here to the sect elders and then have a Han temple dispatch masters to take action. Yang Kai's sudden words made it clear that he wanted to take half of the benefits of these two great sects. These two great sects had each stood tall for tens of thousands of years, so how much wealth had each sect accumulated? Half of both sides' wealth was almost all of a sect's wealth. Kai Gui couldn't imagine how huge this number was. So as soon as he reacted, he instinctively gritted his teeth and said, "Why should I? Even if a Han temple took action, why should they share the things they obtained with others, let alone half of it?" Yang Kai grinned and pointed to the messy battlefield. "Those people were killed by me. If I hadn't fought today, your Han temple wouldn't have been able to reap the benefits. It's not too much to ask for some benefits, right?" Kai Gui was speechless for a while. To be honest, this request was too much, but today he had seen Yang Kai's strength. Two great sects had been crippled by him, so a Han temple was probably nothing in his eyes. If a Han temple really became enemies with this person, the consequences. Kai Gui shuddered just thinking about it. "You just need to go back and tell your temple master, whether he gives or not is up to him." Yang Kai smiled slightly. Kai Gui pondered for a moment before nodding. "Good, I will definitely pass on your message. Farewell." After he finished speaking, he turned into a streak of red light and left in a hurry. At this time was wealth, so he had to return to his sect before the news spread and have the masters from his sect attack quickly. Only then could he take the wealth of the two great sects before the other great forces in the Eastern Territory could react. Lan He and Ling Yinqin watched this scene and were a little speechless, thinking that this guy was still thinking about such things at a time like this. However, it was undeniable that such a huge amount of wealth was something that anyone would be tempted by. "We're rich." Zhu Feng waited for Yang Kai to catch up before looking at him with a smile. "It's just SOSO." Yang Kai laughed, thinking that it wasn't easy for him either. With 100,000 disciples waiting to be fed, as the palace master, he had to find a way to get more cultivation resources. Chapter 33:21. Yang Kai washed up at Ling Yinqin's place, dressed neatly, and meditated the entire night. It was only at dawn the next day that Yang Kai walked out refreshed. Ling Yinqin, who had been waiting outside all night, was shocked by his powerful recovery ability. After the battle between Yang Kai and Kang Mo yesterday, there was almost no place on his body that was unscathed, but after just one night, there were no signs of injury on his body. Such a self-healing ability was truly unimaginable. "Young master." The flashy old man was also waiting outside, and when he saw Yang Kai appear, his eyes flashed with a strange light as he respectfully greeted him. Yang Kai glanced at him and chuckled. After a night of rest, he understood a lot of things. Although he still didn't know the identity of this old man or which divine spirit he was, Yang Kai was certain that this old man was willing to call him young master for only one purpose, and that was to seek his protection. Yesterday, he said that Li Wuyi wanted to take him back to Spirit Beast Island, but he wanted Li Wuyi to ask him if he agreed. This kind of thing, could he really control it? If Li Wuyi really wanted to bring him back to Spirit Beast Island, Yang Kai would definitely agree. This old man didn't look like a good person just from his appearance. If he really stayed by Yang Kai's side, Yang Kai didn't know what kind of outrageous things he would do to ruin his reputation. And with the strength he had shown before, Yang Kai didn't have the ability to restrain him. So, although this call of young master sounded interesting, Yang Kai would never accept such a hot potato. Not to mention that he didn't have the ability to protect him. Even if he did, there was no need to. Yang Kai smiled meaningfully, but the old man didn't seem to notice and asked, "What orders does young master have?" "You flatter me." Yang Kai waved his hand and turned to look at Lan He. "Where are the two seniors now?" Lan He replied, "Last night, the two seniors stayed in Heavenly Wolf Valley and are now in the guest hall." "Take me there." Lan He nodded and immediately led Yang Kai to greet Li Wuyi and Ju Feng. Ling Yin-chin didn't follow. She didn't know Li Wuyi and Ju Feng, and the difference in status between them was great, so there was no need for her to follow them. The two of them were not in the guest hall, but in a pavilion on the peak of a mountain. Lan He led Yang Kai around for a long time before they found Li Wuyi and Ju Feng, who were leaning against the parapet and looking into the distance. Lan He stopped at a distance while Yang Kai flew forward. The flashy old man also followed closely behind, acting like a loyal and courageous bodyguard. Landing on the ground, he solemnly cupped his hands and said, "Junior Yang Kai greets the two seniors." Li Wuyi raised his brow while Ju Feng smiled. "Why are you calling me big sister and big brother yesterday, and now you're calling me senior?" Yang Kai chuckled. "Yesterday is yesterday, today is today." Yesterday, the two seniors deliberately allowed this junior to climb up the social ladder and raise this junior's status so that this junior's strong enemy would retreat. Yang Kai is very grateful, but since the strong enemy is gone today, this junior naturally can't do the same. After a pause, he continued, "Besides, Xiao Qi and I call each other brother and sister, calling you uncle and auntie. If I were to call you seniors as equals, wouldn't that mess up the seniority? What should I call Xiao Qi when I see her in the future?" "You know too much." Ju Feng glared at him. Li Wuyi said, "It's just a title, it's a small matter, don't worry about it. By the way, didn't you go to the territory of the lower world? When did you come back?" "I just came back not long ago." Li Wuyi's expression turned serious. "Did you find Wukong?" As soon as the word Wukong came out, the flamboyant old man, who had been standing quietly to the side, couldn't help but raise his brow and feel a sense of trepidation. Although he and Wukong weren't from the same era, it didn't prevent him from knowing how terrifying Wukong was. Yang Kai sighed. "I did, but I couldn't do anything to him. He was in a hurry to return to the territory of the lower world because he was afraid that Wukong would go to the Heng Luo starfield and commit crimes. Now that he had refined the star territory's star source, Wukong wouldn't have the opportunity to do so. This was because even he would be suppressed by the laws of heaven and earth in the territory of the lower world unless he refined the star territory's star source first. After pondering for a moment, he said, "Wukong's current situation is a bit special. Even if I really have the ability to deal with him, I don't know how to deal with him." Li Wuyi obviously understood what he was worried about and nodded. "It is indeed a bit difficult. Two souls in one body. If it wasn't an ordinary person, it wouldn't be a big deal, but the key was that this was the body of the great emperors of the secular world. If there really was a chance, he couldn't just kill both the great emperors of the secular world and Wukong, right?" Yang Kai thought about it and decided that if he wanted to solve this matter, it would be up to the great emperors of the secular world themselves. Unless he could expel Wukong's soul first, anyone in the world would have a headache dealing with them. And if he really wanted to trace this matter to the root, the culprit was still Yang Kai. Back when the Shattered Star Sea opened, the great emperors of the secular world destroyed their own cultivation and entered it to search for the hiding place of Wukong's soul. They had a chance to perish together, but unexpectedly, Yang Kai also broke in and disturbed the situation. After a series of coincidences, the outcome of perishing together did not occur. Instead, The souls of the two great emperors were entangled together, and it has continued to this day. Li Wuyi suddenly smiled. Even if the sky falls, there will be a tall one to hold it up. Let's not talk about this matter. The matter of the great emperors should be left to the great emperors. It was useless for them to think too much about it. Yang Kai agreed and said, I haven't asked the two of you yet. After I left that day, did anything happen on Dragon Island? Zhu Feng said with a smile, you want to ask about the situation of that dragon girl, right? Yang Kai coughed softly, please enlighten me, Senior Zhu Feng. Zhu Feng's expression darkened, what good ending can there be? The dragon race is proud and xenophobic. What that dragon girl did is the most intolerable thing for the dragon race. She has been banished to the dragon tomb and left to fend for herself. They are courting death. Yang Kai flew into a rage, and monstrous murderous intent roared out like a tsunami, causing Zhu Feng to stare blankly. The flashy old man also glanced at Yang Kai in surprise. It was really rare that he could release such murderous intent with such a cultivation base. And what the hell is that dragon girl? It seems to be this boy's reverse scale. Does this guy have an affair with a dragon girl? This is a bit interesting. No wonder he can transform into a half-dragon body of 300 feet. It seems that he obtained some kind of dragon bloodline inheritance from the dragon race. TSK, this opportunity is really good. Li Wuyi said with a headache, don't listen to this crazy woman's nonsense. Huh? Yang Kai was startled and looked at Zhu Feng again, only to see her looking at him with a teasing expression and a meaningful smile. I've been played. Yang Kai couldn't help but roll his eyes. Senior Zhu Feng, you are so naughty. Does the beast warrior master know? Zhu Feng also rolled her eyes. It's none of his business. Yang Kai simply ignored her and turned to look at Li Wuyi. Senior Li, the dragon race didn't do anything to Zhu Qing, right? Li Wuyi said, what else? She was just punished to reflect on her mistakes on Dragon Island. After all, she is also an elder of the dragon race. That being said, Li Wuyi always felt that Zhu Qing was punished so lightly because the dragon race gave face to Yang Kai. Fu Xian was also an elder of the dragon race, but after the incident with the martial beast, she was still banished to the dragon tomb. But, how could Yang Kai's face be greater than martial beasts? What kind of logic was this? At least they know what's good for them. Yang Kai snorted. Just reflecting on her mistakes in seclusion wasn't too much of a punishment. If Zhu Qing was really banished to the dragon tomb, she might cause havoc on Dragon Island again. Suddenly, he asked, what about the third elder? The third elder of the dragon race, Fu Xian, was Mo Xiaoqi's mother, Martial Beast's wife. Speaking of which, they were also enemies. Martial Beast controlled all the beasts in the star boundary, and no one dared to disobey his orders. Strictly speaking, the dragon race was also a kind of monster beast, but of a higher grade. Since Martial Beast controlled all the beasts in the world, he naturally wouldn't have any ideas about the dragon race. If he wanted to subdue a dragon race, both of them were in the Eastern Territory, so naturally he could get close to them. After much planning and waiting, the Martial Beast Great Emperor had indeed subdued a dragon. However, it wasn't a simple subjugation. He had subdued it in a different way. The two of them had even given birth to a daughter. Every time he thought of this, Yang Kai couldn't help but admire Martial Beast. Logically speaking, the higher one's cultivation, the lower the possibility of giving birth to a child. And when a human and a dragon race couple, the possibility of giving birth to a child was even lower. It was almost impossible for the two to become a couple. Even so, Mo Xiaoqi was still able to be born. It had to be said that this was definitely an anomaly. It was just that when Yang Kai was with Mo Xiaoqi before, he didn't notice that she had the bloodline of the dragon race. He didn't know whether it was because she didn't have it or because Martial Beast had used a great divine technique to seal it. Mistress. Li Wuyi thought of Fu Xian and recalled the scene of that day, smiling slightly. She was accompanying that Zhu Qing. After Yang Kai left that day, the dragons of Dragon Island were also physically and mentally exhausted. After all, they had just experienced an earth-shattering battle and had one of their dragons killed by Wukong. It could be said that they had suffered a huge loss. The dragon race had very few members to begin with. Often, there would be no new members born for hundreds or thousands of years. The death of any one of them was a huge loss. Martial Beast wanted to take this opportunity to leave Dragon Island with Fu Xian and return to Spirit Beast Island. As long as they could return to Spirit Beast Island, the dragon race wouldn't be able to do anything to them. However, the second elder, Fu Sai, was determined not to comply. Yang Kai had also experienced that woman's temper. She was smelly and stubborn, as if she hadn't been happy for dozens of lifetimes. With her obstructing him from the side, the martial beast Great Emperor was naturally enraged, and the two sides were about to fight again. In the end, Fu Xian took the initiative to ask to stay. However, as a compromise, Fu Sai no longer mentioned banishing Fu Xian to the dragon tomb. Now, the two elders of the dragon race had committed the same mistake and were reflecting on their mistakes on Dragon Island. Chapter 33-22. At this point, Martial Beast had no other choice. If Fu Xian wanted to, he could still take her away by force, but Fu Xian herself didn't want the relationship between Martial Beast and Dragon Island to be too strained. What else could he do? In the end, he could only retreat. Before leaving, Mo Huang once said that if Fu Xian suffered any grievances, he would definitely wash Dragon Island with blood. After Li Wuyi finished speaking, he suddenly realized something and said, "You want to go to Dragon Island again?" Yang Kai said, "Of course, I came to the Eastern Territory this time to ask Senior for some advice on the law of space, and also to go to Dragon Island to pick up Zhu Qing." As soon as this statement came out, Li Wuyi and Zhu Feng looked at him as if they were looking at a monster. Is there a problem? Yang Kai looked at the two of them. Zhu Feng chuckled and said, no problem, I wish you success first." Although she said that, she was not optimistic about Yang Kai's trip. Even her master couldn't bring Mistress out, so how could Yang Kai do it? Yang Kai nodded gently and said, "But before that, I have one more thing to ask the two of you." Li Wuyi said, "There's no harm in saying it. Although what we said yesterday was intended to elevate your status, there is one thing we didn't lie about. Now, you can be considered half a person of Spirit Beast Island. Whether you admit it or not, you are deeply involved with Spirit Beast Island. Do you understand? If something happened to Spirit Beast Island, Liu Yang would definitely sit back and watch." Liu Yang couldn't ignore it, so naturally, Yang Kai couldn't ignore it. In other words, if something happened to Yang Kai, Spirit Beast Island would definitely not ignore it. Therefore, the two sides already had some inseparable ties. Yang Kai nodded and smiled slightly. "I understand. It's because I understand that I didn't stand on ceremony with the two seniors." "That's good." Yang Kai pointed to the side and said, "What the hell is this old guy?" The flamboyant old man's face twitched. "Young master, I'm not a ghost." Yang Kai turned a deaf ear. "The two seniors said that you came for him and wanted to take him back to Spirit Beast Island. I can see that he is a divine spirit, but why did he call me young master and seek protection from me?" Senior Li also said that I should know him. He had some speculations that it was related to Zhong Ruoshi, but when he thought about it carefully, it was unlikely. Even if the divine spirits knew about his relationship with Zhong Ruoshi, they would only fear him and would not flatter you because flattery was meaningless to them. "Where? From?" Nine Phoenix's red lips parted slightly, and 4 words came out of her rosy mouth: "The Four Seasons Realm." The Four Seasons Realm? Yang Kai was shocked, then suddenly remembered something. He turned his head and stared at the flamboyant old man. "You are?" The old man bowed and said, "Chengqi greets young master." Yang Kai sucked in a breath of cold air and almost jumped up in shock. Chengqi. This old man is actually Chengqi. Speaking of the Four Seasons Realm, Yang Kai had already guessed the identity of this old man. After all, there was indeed a Chengqi in the Four Seasons Realm, but hearing him admit it himself still shocked him. It's really Chengqi, the Mount of the Flowing Time Great Emperor, the Great Emperors. Yang Kai looked at him from head to toe. How did he turn into a human? He didn't look domineering at all. Instead, he looked fierce, almost engraved with the word evil on his forehead. Since ancient times, there had been countless great emperors, but the only one who could make a sacred spirit be a mount was the Flowing Time Great Emperor. Although the current martial beast Great Emperor was said to be able to control all beasts, and there was even the 9 phoenixes on the Spirit Beast Island, their relationship was more like family than a master and a mount. Although sacred spirits weren't as powerful as the Great Emperors, they still had their own dignity. Who would be willing to be a mount for others? Chongqi could be said to be the only one. Yang Kai didn't know how the Flowing Time Great Emperor tamed him. Even after the fall of the Flowing Time Great Emperor, the Great Emperors, he had been sleeping in the Flowing Time Temple, guarding the Flowing Time Temple for countless years. It wasn't until the recent opening of the Four Seasons realm that he came out. It wasn't that he didn't have the ability to leave. With his ability, if he really wanted to leave the Flowing Time Temple, he could leave at any time, but for some reason, he had been guarding there. When Yang Kai wandered the Flowing Time Temple with his insignificant cultivation, he felt Chongqi's aura on the steps of the Flowing Time Great Emperor. Even Zhong Ruo Shi, who was with him, was taken away by Chongqi's great divine technique. At that time, Yang Kai thought that Zhong Ruo Shi had met with misfortune, but he didn't expect that Zhong Ruo Shi would be sent back not long after. Not only was she unscathed, but she also told him that she had met a monster beast called Chongqi. Chongqi's attitude towards her was very good, like a kind grandpa next door, and he even gave her a defensive emperor artifact, the rainbow feather raiment, which she wore to this day. At that time, Yang Kai wondered if Chongqi was mentally ill. Not only did he take a girl away for no reason, he even gave her a precious artifact. Now, it seemed that Chongqi wasn't mentally ill, but had foresight. He must have felt the hidden bloodline power in Zhong Ruoshi's body at that time, otherwise, he wouldn't have been so fond of her. He couldn't afford to offend a descendant of Tian Xing. Later, when the Four Seasons realm closed, Yang Kai learned from Jiao Shueting that Chongqi had escaped. When he appeared that day, he gave them a fright. Fortunately, Chongqi didn't do anything to them and left. Now, several decades had passed without any news, and it was only today that they met again. Yang Kai stroked his chin and circled Chongqi a few times with great interest, clicking his tongue in wonder. After a while, he came to a stop and asked, "Are you really Chongqi?" Chongqi lowered his head and replied, "Yes." Yang Kai nodded, "There are good and evil divine spirits, and Chongqi seems to be the evil of the evil, so there's no benefit in pretending to be you." "Well, it seems that you really are Chongqi. No wonder that old dog Kang Mo called you an evil spirit." Chongqi coughed lightly and said, "Hearsay is not to be trusted. This old master has long since abandoned evil and turned over a new leaf." "Is that so?" Yang Kai's tone dragged out, making it clear that he didn't believe him. Chongqi sighed, "My bad reputation has misled me." He looked like he was in so much pain that he wished he could die right now to prove his innocence. Yang Kai turned to look at Li Wuyi and said, "Senior, please use the divine technique to subdue this evil spirit, lest it cause chaos in the world." Chongqi glared at him, wanting to cry but having no tears. "Young master, stop." Yang Kai raised his hand, "You call me young master because I obtained the inheritance of the great emperors of the Flowing Time Great Emperor and cultivated the Flowing Time Great Emperor's swift shuttle, right?" Then, he suddenly thought of something. "You were able to find me, is it because I used the Flowing Time Great Emperor's swift shuttle? Can you feel the aura of the Flowing Time Great Emperor?" "Yes." Chongqi nodded. The reason why this old man stayed in the temple was to wait for the destined person to inherit the master's mantle. After countless Flowing Time Great Emperors came, one finally appeared, and young master is the successor of the master. Yang Kai chuckled, "It's true that I obtained the grace of the Flowing Time Great Emperor, but it's a bit of an exaggeration to talk about inheritance. What's more, the Flowing Time Great Emperor is different from the Great Emperors of the Flowing Time Great Emperor. We are not one and the same. You are the mount of the Flowing Time Great Emperor, and I admire you for your loyalty to the Flowing Time Great Emperor. However, I have also heard of Chongqi's great name. I am not qualified to be your young master, so don't call me that. If it were any other sacred spirit, it would be fine, but the problem was that Chongqi was too notorious, and Yang Kai didn't want to get involved." After a pause, he said, "Actually, Old Cheong, you actually called me Old Cheong?" Chongqi couldn't help but stare. Spirit Beast Island is not bad. The land and water there are good, and the land is full of outstanding people. Seeing that you are already so old, there is no need for you to run around. Isn't it good for you to retire at Spirit Beast Island? I believe that Beast Warrior Master, Senior Lee, and Senior 9 Phoenix won't make things difficult for you, as long as you behave yourself there. Li Wui said, that's right. Although you haven't done anything bad since your last appearance, my master is worried that you will return to your old ways, so he asked me and Feng to bring you back to Spirit Beast Island. However, you can rest assured that you will not encounter any harsh treatment on Spirit Beast Island. As long as you stay on Spirit Beast Island, you can do whatever you want. You also called me Old Cheung? Believe it or not, I will eat you in one bite. Cheungchi said angrily, you want to put this old man under house arrest? Just because of some worries? Li Wui frowned and said, please forgive us. 9 Phoenix said, we have been chasing you all the way until now. Have the two of us ever made things difficult for you? We have said all the good and bad things, but you still ran away. What's wrong with Spirit Beast Island? We don't want to put you under house arrest. If you want to come out in the future, you may have a chance. Cheungchi shook his head and said, this old man only recognizes one person in his life, the Flowing Time Great Emperor. The Flowing Time Great Emperor is dead, and he has a successor. This old man is also willing to follow the successor. If that successor is unwilling, this old man will go and live freely. Spirit Beast Island, it's fine if I don't go. Do you really have to be so determined? Li Wui frowned. If possible, he also didn't want to fight with Cheungchi. Although this guy was not young, he was ranked very high among the holy spirits and was very difficult to deal with. Even if he and 9 Phoenix joined forces, the chance of defeating him was less than 50%. Cheungchi said, please don't make things difficult for this old man anymore. Li Wui let out a long sigh. Cheungchi's eyes were resolute, and the atmosphere in the air seemed to become a little dangerous at this moment. Are you really willing to follow this kid? Recognize this kid as your master? 9 Phoenix looked at Cheungchi with a strange expression. Cheungchi said, this old man doesn't want to be enemies with Spirit Beast Island. There is no other way. If he didn't follow Yang Kai, he was bound to go against Spirit Beast Island unless he had the ability to get rid of Li Wui's tracking. However, Li Wui had planted a secret space seal on him. As long as Li Wui thought about it, he could sense his position. How could he get rid of it? So after thinking about it, only Yang Kai could help him. Moreover, it was a great coincidence to be able to meet Yang Kai in the Eastern Territory this time. Cheungchi even had a feeling that the Flowing Time Great Emperor was protecting him from the Great Emperors. Otherwise, how could it be so coincidental to feel the aura of the Flowing Time Great Emperor when he was in a desperate situation? Chapter 33-23. Little Yang, this old guy seems to really want to follow you. What do you think? Ju Feng looked at Yang Kai with a smile and winked. It's a blessing to have a holy spirit recognize you as its master. If it were someone else who encountered such a thing, they would not care whether Cheungchi's reputation was good or bad. They would be overjoyed and agree immediately. Yang Kai snorted and said disdainfully, it's not like I don't have one. What do you have? Cheungchi glared at him. Ju Feng suddenly thought of Liu Yang and thought that it made sense. This was a rare opportunity for others, but Yang Kai already had Liu Yang. The Phoenix clan's ranking was higher than Cheungchi's. Perhaps Liu Yang's current strength was not as good as Cheungchi's, but his future growth was definitely much greater than Cheungchi's. For him, Cheungchi's recognition of him as its master might not be that attractive. What's more, anyone could tell that Cheungchi just wanted to take advantage of the situation at this moment. It was impossible to determine whether this intention was real or not. If he protected Cheungchi now, and Cheungchi turned against him in the future, wouldn't he be shooting himself in the foot? Ju Feng turned to look at Cheungchi and said, you heard it. You'd better go back to Spirit Beast Island with us obediently. Cheungchi said with a solemn expression, this old man doesn't want to start a war with you. Ju Feng said lightly, you sound like I want to. Although Li Wui didn't speak, his firm eyes showed that once he really attacked, he would definitely not show mercy. Cheungchi suddenly turned to look at Yang Kai, and his divine sense surged. Yang Kai, who was looking at the scenery and staying out of the matter, suddenly changed his expression. He turned to look at Cheongchi, and his divine sense also fluctuated. The two of them were actually communicating with their divine senses right in front of Li Wuyi and Ju Feng. Li Wuyi and Ju Feng looked at each other, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Although they didn't know what they were talking about, they guessed that Cheongchi must be discussing with Yang Kai about recognizing him as his master, and he must have offered some conditions that tempted Yang Kai. Because from the corners of their eyes, they could clearly see that Yang Kai's expression was constantly changing, sometimes surprised, sometimes shocked, sometimes pleasantly surprised, sometimes scratching his head. In the end, Yang Kai calmed down and fell silent. Cheongchi stared at him without blinking. After a while, Yang Kai. Cheongchi grinned. "Thank you, young master." "No need to thank me." Yang Kai did not object to the title this time. Instead, he turned to Li Wuyi and said, "Senior, if I vouch for you, can you take this old man with you? He won't have to go to Spirit Beast Island. Senior and Beast Warrior Master can rest assured that I will strictly watch over him and will never let him do anything outrageous." Li Wuyi frowned and said, "Are you really going to vouch for him?" Yang Kai chuckled and said, "He said something that interested me very much. I can't refuse." Li Wuyi had guessed this would be the case, but he couldn't figure out what Cheongchi had said to Yang Kai just now that had caused such a big change in Yang Kai's attitude. Just a moment ago, Cheongchi had a look of disdain on his face, but now he was actually taking the initiative to vouch for him. Ju Feng said solemnly, "Cheongchi is not as good as Liu Yang. Can you restrain him?" Liu Yang had been by Yang Kai's side since she was a nobody. It could even be said that Yang Kai single-handedly created Liu Yang, allowing her to grow up and become enlightened. Liu Yang was absolutely loyal to Yang Kai, but Cheongchi was different. He was fierce and powerful. She was afraid that Yang Kai would not be able to deter Cheongchi and cause her to suffer in the end. Yang Kai smiled slightly and said, "Since I said so, I naturally have a way to restrain him." He turned to look at Cheongchi and said, "I won't hide it from you. The little girl you saw back then has awakened her bloodline and is already inheriting the power of her ancestors. So, if you have any other thoughts, it's best to dispel them first, lest you accidentally get killed." Cheongchi was shocked. "It's already awakened?" Although Yang Kai didn't say who it was, how could he not know who the little girl was? It was precisely because he sensed Tianxing's aura that he tried to please Zhong Ruoxi. He didn't expect her to awaken so quickly. According to his observation at the time, it would take at least a few hundred years for her to awaken. Such a fast speed could only mean that something had happened in between. He cupped his fists solemnly and said, "Young master, rest assured. Since you are that person's successor, this old master will follow you closely and serve you faithfully." Yang Kai looked at Li Wuyi and Ju Feng and smiled. "Seniors, what do you think?" After a pause, he continued, "Of course, if you insist on taking him back to Spirit Beast Island, then so be it." Li Wuyi and Ju Feng looked at each other, both thinking about the same thing. The little girl that Yang Kai mentioned. What's going on? Why did Cheongchi seem to be a little scared when he heard about the little girl? Who else in this world could make him feel scared except for the great emperors? And he mentioned the bloodline awakening. Faintly, both of them seemed to have thought of something. Li Wuyi's eyes flashed while Ju Feng's delicate body trembled. She wanted to ask Yang Kai about the specific situation of the little girl, but she was afraid to say it. After a long while, Li Wuyi said, "Previously, I said that you are half a member of Spirit Beast Island. Now that you have stepped forward to guarantee that he can be considered to be under the supervision of Spirit Beast Island. This does not conflict with the purpose of our trip. However, we still have to ask the master about this matter." Yang Kai nodded and said, "Of course. In that case, let's go to Spirit Beast Island first." Originally, he didn't have to go to Spirit Beast Island with Li Wuyi here, but since he wanted to ask the martial beast, he had to make an extra trip. Li Wuyi smiled slightly and said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble." While speaking, he took out a jade slip and poured his divine sense into it. Then, he flicked his finger and shouted, "Go." The small jade slip shot out into the void and disappeared in an instant. Yang Kai's eyes widened and he asked with great interest, Senior can send a message back to Spirit Beast Island with this move. Just now, Li Wuyi had obviously used the power of space to send the jade slip with the message back to Spirit Beast Island, but how far was this place from Spirit Beast Island? Even with the space divine technique, how could it be sent back? Moreover, how could it be located? For a moment, Yang Kai was itching to ask Li Wuyi for advice. Li Wuyi smiled and said, "It's just a subtle use of the space law. I'll explain it to you in detail later. With your current attainments, it won't be difficult to learn." Yang Kai grinned and said, "Thank you, Senior." Li Wuyi raised his hand and said, "In the world, there may be many people who cultivate the space law, but there are not many who are as proficient in it as you and I. It will be beneficial for me to discuss it with you. Senior is too modest. This junior should learn from you." Yang Kai said solemnly. Ju Feng curled her lips and said, "Is it fun to brag?" Cheongqi said proudly from the side, "Although the space law is exquisite, it is slightly inferior to the time law." Yang Kai immediately glanced at him and asked, "You know the time law?" Cheongqi's face twitched and he said embarrassedly, "I don't." He was just the mount of the Flowing Time Great Emperor. Although he had followed the Flowing Time Great Emperor for a long time and had seen the majesty of the time law displayed by the Great Emperors, he had no attainments in this field. Yang Kai said, "The power of the time law depends on the person. Each has its own merits, so there is no difference in strength." Li Wuyi's eyes lit up. "That's right. The most powerful time law also depends on the person." Just as he was speaking, Li Wuyi's expression suddenly changed. He stretched out his hand and a jade slip flew into his hand. Obviously, there was a reply from the Spirit Beast Island. So fast. It only took a dozen breaths of time. Yang Kai guessed that Li Wuyi's jade slip must have been directly transmitted to Martial Beast, which was why there was a reply so quickly. Cheongqi's expression immediately tensed up as he stared at Li Wuyi without blinking. He secretly made up his mind that as long as Li Wuyi showed the slightest change in expression, he would immediately run away. He didn't want to be under house arrest on Spirit Beast Island no matter what. But no matter how he looked, Li Wuyi's expression was as indifferent as before, without the slightest abnormality. This made Cheongqi's heart flutter. He didn't know what Martial Beast's attitude was. After a while, Li Wuyi finished his inspection. He glanced at Cheongqi and then at Yang Kai and said, "The master said, you are in charge of this matter." As soon as this was said, Cheongqi breathed a sigh of relief and nervously looked at Yang Kai. Since the decision was in Yang Kai's hands, it would depend on whether his proposal was effective. It should be effective. Cheongqi secretly prayed. "I am in charge." Yang Kai stroked his chin and chuckled. "The great emperors are really giving me face." Li Wuyi smiled and said, "The master said that since you have some relationship with old Cheong, you are the most suitable person to watch over him. If he really goes back on his words, it won't be too late for Spirit Beast Island to step in and deal with him." "Good," Yang Kai nodded. "Since the great emperors are so kind, this junior will accept it." He turned to Cheongqi and said, "Old Cheong, you will follow me in the future. You have also heard the great emperor's words. In the future, you need to do more good deeds and eliminate evil as soon as possible. If you dare to break the law, not only will the great emperors not let you off, even this young master won't let you off." "Yes," Cheongqi respectfully replied. Suddenly, he said with a bitter face, "Young master, the name Old Cheong, can we change it?" "How? Old Cheong?" Cheongqi said, "Although it is not far from it. Back then, the old master called this old man Little Seven." "Young master, you see, the word chi and the word chi are homophonic, so if young master doesn't mind, you can call this old man Little Seven." Why do you have such expressions?" On the opposite side, whether it was Yang Kai, Li Wuyi, or Ju Feng, they all looked at him strangely. Yang Kai's face twitched, and he waved his hand with a look of disdain. "Old Cheong is a good name. There is no need to change it. Of all things to call him Little Seven, Mo Huang's daughter, the little princess of Spirit Beast Island, was also called Little Seven. She was an innocent little girl, but you were an old man with a fierce face. How could Yang Kai call her that?" Li Wuyi and Ju Feng obviously had the same thought. Chapter 33-24. Sigh, old Cheung it is. Cheungchi also accepted his fate. Yang Kai nodded and said, "You can leave first. I have something to discuss with Senior Lee, yes." Cheungchi responded respectfully. He turned his head and flew far away, landing on a treetop. He stepped on the tip of the tree and put his hands behind his back, looking like he was riding the wind. If it weren't for the red robe that ruined his image, he would have the demeanor of an otherworldly expert. Inside the pavilion, Yang Kai said, "Regarding Cheungchi, I ask the two of you and the great emperor to rest assured, I will strictly discipline him." Ju Feng said, "You need to remember that going too far is as bad as falling short. After all, he is an ancient divine spirit who has lived for longer than the flowing time great emperor. Although he wants to recognize you as his master, you can't see the slightest reluctance. However, if you push him too far, it won't be good. You have to know how far you should go." "I know." Yang Kai nodded. Although having such an evil spirit by his side was more or less a threat, Yang Kai was not a persimmon that could be easily pinched, nor was he a greenhorn. He would observe Cheungchi's nature carefully in the future. With Cheungchi's matter settled, Yang Kai immediately couldn't wait to ask Li Wui about the law of space. Since he cultivated the power of space, this was the first time he discussed this with someone. Yang Kai couldn't help but be a little excited. "Senior Li, how did you send the jade slip back to Spirit Beast Island just now? Can you demonstrate it for me again?" Li Wui smiled slightly. "It's not difficult." While speaking, he raised his finger, and the law of space at his fingertip danced, drawing on the stone table in front of him. Yang Kai used his eyes to observe and found that he was drawing an extremely complicated array diagram. As he drew, Yang Kai couldn't help but let out a soft cry of surprise. This was because he found that this array diagram was somewhat similar to the array diagram of the territory crossing space array he had arranged, but there were also some differences. A moment later, Li Wui withdrew his hand. The stone table in front of him did not change at all, but Yang Kai could clearly feel that there was an additional layer of space principles on the stone table. The invisible array diagram was branded on the stone table by the space principles. Li Wui tossed a blank jade slip to Yang Kai. Yang Kai said, "Pour something into it." Yang Kai nodded, pinched the jade slip, and with a thought, inscribed his soul brand on it. "Give it to me." Nine Phoenix extended her hand. Although he didn't know what she wanted to do, Yang Kai still cooperated and handed over the jade slip. Nine Phoenix received the jade slip before her delicate figure flashed out explosively, and she vanished in the blink of an eye. Yang Kai looked thoughtfully in the direction Nine Phoenix left. After waiting for about half a cup of tea's time, the stone table in front of him suddenly flashed with white light. When Yang Kai turned his head to look, he saw that a jade slip had appeared there out of nowhere. Yang Kai raised his brow. "This is..." Li Wui smiled and said, "You'll know when you see it for yourself." Yang Kai reached out and picked up the jade slip. After a brief examination, he found that this jade slip was the one he had just inscribed his soul brand on, which was also the one Nine Phoenix had taken away. Now, it had appeared in front of him out of thin air. Li Wui pointed at the stone table and said, "I can use the space principles to inscribe a space beacon. As long as the location of the space beacon is inscribed, this Li or something in my hands can instantly teleport there." Yang Kai's eyes lit up. "This is exactly the same as a space array." Li Wui nodded. "Exactly. Normally, you use a space array to teleport people away, but I use it to teleport objects, so it's less difficult, but the principle is still the same." Yang Kai clicked his tongue in wonder. "This stone table is just an ordinary stone, but you can inscribe a space brand on it." Li Wui said, "Yes, but it can only be maintained for a very short time. If you want to leave it there for a long time, you'll need some special materials." Yang Kai raised his brow. "Space spirit crystals or space spirit jades?" Li Wui smiled. "Exactly. I understand." Yang Kai was overjoyed, as if he had just obtained a precious treasure. If this method is used to transmit messages, it will be much more effective than a communication artifact. A communication artifact had a range limit. If the distance was too far, it would not be able to transmit a message, but this method was different. No matter how far the distance was, it could be transmitted in an instant. Martial Beast must have a space beacon left by Li Wui in advance, so the jade slip just now could be sent back immediately. Correspondingly, Martial Beast's reply could also be sent back immediately. Yang Kai's heart was burning with excitement, and he immediately began to inscribe a space beacon on the stone table in front of him. Li Wui watched from the side, correcting him from time to time, allowing him to master this method in a very short time. Not long after, a new space beacon was formed. Yang Kai stood up and laughed. "I'll be right back." He flew out in a flash, just in time to run into Ju Feng, who was returning. As they brushed past each other, Ju Feng glanced at him suspiciously, then turned to Li Wui and asked, "Did he learn it?" Li Wui nodded. "His attainments in the space principles are not much worse than mine. All he lacks is the accumulation of time, so it's only natural for him to learn these little tricks." Ju Feng asked, "You seem very happy. What's there to be happy about being secretly learned?" Li Wui smiled slightly. "There's one more Liu Yang in this world." "Are you happy?" Ju Feng's expression changed and she nodded. "I see." Just as they were talking, a light flashed on the stone table in front of them, and a high-rank source crystal appeared out of thin air. Li Wui reached out and picked it up, weighing it a few times, and said, "You can draw inferences from one." Before he finished speaking, another object appeared in front of him. It turned out to be a large stone weighing 100 kilograms. He didn't know where Yang Kai found it, but he directly threw it over through the space beacon. This was not the end of it. The stone table flashed again, and a 30-meter-tall giant wolf suddenly appeared in front of Li Wui. It was the kind of monster beast that could be found everywhere in Heavenly Wolf Valley. This monster beast's level was not low, at least at the Dao Source realm. As soon as it appeared, it looked extremely frightened, and with a howl, it opened its mouth and spat out a visible wind blade at Li Wui. Li Wui flicked his finger, shattering the wind blade, and laughed, "It's none of my business. You've got the wrong person." He waved his hand again, and a soft wind blew out, carrying the giant wolf 1,000 meters away and putting it down. The giant wolf was scared out of its wits by the sudden change, and as soon as it was free, it immediately fled with its tail between its legs, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Yang Kai's figure flashed, and he had already returned to the pavilion. He said thoughtfully, "This technique has some restrictions on the size and weight of the object it teleports. If it exceeds these limits, it seems to be useless." Li Wui said, "Of course. If there were no restrictions, wouldn't you be able to move a mountain if you wanted to? But it's enough to send a message." "Senior is right." Yang Kai nodded, "But it's already very impressive that it can teleport living things. By the way, Senior, it shouldn't be a problem to teleport people, right?" Li Wui said, "Of course it's not a problem." Yang Kai rubbed his chin. "If I leave space beacons all over the star boundary, won't I be able to go wherever I want in the future?" This was much more convenient than shattering space and arranging space arrays. But then again, even though it was convenient, it couldn't teleport people on a large scale. In this regard, it was inferior to space arrays. Li Wui said, "Logically speaking, it should be possible. Then, I wonder if the same is true for engraving space beacons on space spirit jades." Li Wui smiled slightly. "You can try." Yang Kai didn't hesitate and immediately took out a palm-sized piece of space spirit jade and began carving it. Although the space spirit jade was a bit small, Yang Kai had already experienced it before, so he was able to easily carve the space beacon array onto it. After engraving it, he carefully inspected it to make sure there were no problems. Yang Kai's heart skipped a beat as he looked at Li Wui and said, "Senior, please leave your contact information. It'll be easier for us to communicate in the future." "That's exactly what I was thinking." Li Wui smiled. "I was wondering how long it would take you to consider this, but I didn't expect you to think of it so quickly." Yang Kai grinned meaningfully and said, "It was a stroke of inspiration." Li Wui stretched out his hand and handed over a round bead, one that was obviously carefully polished from space spirit jade and carefully strung together with a piece of heavenly silk, allowing it to be worn around Yang Kai's wrist. Although this method is convenient for communication, the space beacons cannot be isolated. If you place them in a space ring, they won't work. You can wear this thing on your wrist, so if I want to contact you in the future, I can do so at any time. Senior is so thoughtful. Yang Kai glanced at the bead necklace on Li Wui's wrist and guessed that he should have left such contact information with many people. Looking at Li Wui's space spirit jade bead and comparing it to his own, he couldn't help feeling embarrassed, so he immediately said, "I'll also make a similar one for Senior, otherwise it won't be easy to carry around." Li Wui nodded, "All right." Yang Kai immediately began polishing it carefully, and after a short while, a new space spirit jade bead was produced. At this point, the two sides had exchanged contact beads. Li Wui continued seriously, "You and I are both proficient in the Tao of space, and each of us has the other's beacon, so it's convenient for us to transmit messages. We only need to think about it and we can send out a jade slip, but if others want to do this, they will need to use a matching space spirit jade bead. Because they don't have the Tao of space, they won't be able to accurately locate our beacon. They can only rely on the matching space spirit jade bead to locate our beacon." "I understand." Yang Kai nodded. Even if Li Wui hadn't said this, he had already thought about it. When Ju Feng returned the jade slip, although she didn't use any space spirit jade beads, Li Wui had left his space force on the jade slip in advance, so Ju Feng only needed to activate it slightly and the jade slip would automatically return. Yang Kai then said, "It's impolite not to reciprocate. Since this junior has learned how to use space beads from Senior, I would like Senior to appraise the space array I arranged." Li Wui asked with great interest, "You know how to arrange space arrays?" Yang Kai smiled slightly with an unfathomable look on his face. "Please wait and see, but this thing is a bit troublesome to arrange. It's not as exquisite as Senior's method, so I hope Senior won't be impatient." Chapter 33-25. Yang Kai was already familiar with the layout of a space array, so he didn't move from his original spot and simply set it up in an open space next to the pavilion on the summit. Li Wui stood with his hands behind his back and watched quietly, his expression constantly changing. Sometimes he was surprised, sometimes he was puzzled, sometimes he was shocked, and sometimes he was enlightened. It seemed that he had gained a lot just by watching. Half a day later, the space array had taken shape. Yang Kai inspected it and after confirming that there were no problems, he looked at Li Wui and said, "Please examine it, Senior." Li Wui gave him a meaningful look before striding into the space array. His space principles fluctuated as he closed his eyes and quietly sensed the space array. After a while, he said, "What kind of restrictions did you place on this space array? It seems that only a special method can activate this array." Yang Kai grinned, "Senior is right. The space array arranged by me requires a space token specially refined by me in order to be activated. Otherwise, even if you occupy this array, it won't be of any use." Li Wui nodded, "This restriction is quite exquisite and eliminates the drawbacks of being used by others. It seems to be connected to a lot of places, but what?" Yang Kai looked at him with a smile. Li Wuyi's brows furrowed as he muttered to himself, "But why does it feel so far away?" Suddenly, his eyes snapped open and a divine light burst out from them as he exclaimed, "Is this a domain crossing space array? A territory crossing space array?" Ju Feng was also startled, her small mouth forming a sexy shape as she looked at Li Wui and asked, "Are you sure?" Li Wui slowly shook his head, "Although I don't know where this array connects to, those places are very far away from each other. This is definitely not something that an ordinary space array can connect. It has long surpassed the limit." "Yang Kai, is this really a territory crossing space array?" Yang Kai nodded, "Senior's eyes are sharp, this is indeed a territory crossing space array." Nine Phoenix turned her head and looked at him incredulously. "You can actually set up a spatial array that crosses territory?" Yang Kai was speechless. Compared to Senior Li's spatial beacon method, it's a little bloated and not flexible enough. Ju Feng couldn't help but roll her eyes. In comparison, his methods are petty. Li Wui turned a deaf ear to this as he stood on the spell formation and carefully sensed it, clicking his tongue in wonder. He had seen space arrays that could cross territory, but there were only a few in the entire star boundary. They were all things that had been passed down from ancient times. Although some of them were still preserved, they could no longer be used. He had once carefully studied some of the flowing time Great Emperor, but he was unable to decipher its mysteries. It was during that study that the space beacon was discovered. He never thought that Yang Kai would be able to set up a territory-crossing space array. Where does this array connect to? Li Wui asked curiously. You can go to the Southern Territory, the Northern Territory, and the Eastern Territory's savage, desolate ancient land. Li Wui was dumbfounded. It seems you've been to a lot of places. Only when Yang Kai personally went to those places and left a territory-crossing space array would they be able to connect to each other and teleport. How could Li Wui not understand this? Yang Kai was not very old, but he had actually wandered between several territory in the star boundary. He had even been to places like the savage, desolate ancient land and left behind a space array. This kind of experience and knowledge was far beyond his peers. After pondering for a moment, Li Wui asked, I'm a little curious, where did you get that array diagram? Did you comprehend it yourself? The foundation of a space array was the array diagram. Without the array diagram, this array was nothing more than a dead object and had no use at all. Li Wui had also studied a lot of the flowing time Great Emperor in the past, but he still couldn't understand it. Now that he saw the complete array diagram in Yang Kai's hands, he was naturally very curious. Yang Kai thought for a moment and asked, I wonder if Senior knows yang inflammation? Yang inflammation? Li Wui raised his brow. The yang inflammation in the Star Court? Yang Kai smiled and said, it seems Senior knows her. Ju Feng asked curiously, why, do you know her? Yang Kai said, she and I can be considered old friends. Old friends? Li Wui and Ju Feng looked at each other, speechless. Yang inflammation was in existence on the same level as them. Although Yang Kai's cultivation was good, he was only a second-order Emperor Realm Master, and he was at most 100 years old. Yet, he said that he was old friends with Yang inflammation. If someone else said this, the two would definitely think that they were bragging, but the person who said this was Yang Kai, so it was not so abrupt. You two also know that I came up from the lower star territory. Yang inflammation was also in that star territory, but her main body was injured and dormant, so she manifested a trapped clone. I met her clone at that time, and I obtained the space array diagram from her. As Yang Kai spoke, he couldn't help but recall the past and sighed, she took care of me a lot back then. It turned out to be her. Li Wui was slightly stunned. Ju Feng said, I heard that this woman is a master of both arrays and artifacts. I don't know if it's true or not, but if it's her, it makes sense. Yang inflammation may not be proficient in the Tao of space, but her attainments in the Tao of spirit arrays were extremely high. The South Gate army was completely incomparable to her. Space arrays were also a kind of spirit array, so it was not surprising that Yang inflammation knew the diagram. It was just that she did not possess the Tao of space, so she could not arrange a space array. Li Wui nodded and said, speaking of this woman, I remember a rumor. What is it? Ju Feng looked at him curiously. Li Wui said, there was once such a person who had such profound attainments in the Tao of space that he was even qualified to become great emperors with the Tao of space. Even I am slightly inferior to him now. This person could be said to be a stunning talent, one that appeared throughout the ages. But later, he disappeared for no reason, and no one knows where he went. And this person is said to be acquainted with Yang inflammation, and they have a good relationship. After saying that, he shook his head and said, but I don't know if the rumors are true or false. Li Wui himself was not sure, but Yang Kai's expression changed when he heard this. This was because when Yang inflammation handed the sealed world bead to him, she said that this sealed world bead belonged to a friend of hers. As for who her friend was, whether she was alive or dead, Yang inflammation did not mention anything. It was only because Yang Kai was proficient in the Tao of space that he could use the sealed world bead's function that it was given to him. Combined with what Li Wui said at this moment, Yang Kai felt that this rumor was very likely to be true. The sealed world bead was a world of its own, but it was not born naturally, and must have been artificially refined. An existence that could refine such a thing would definitely have extremely high attainments in the Tao of space. Yang Kai knew that he could not compare with them now. Ju Feng smiled and said, since it's just hearsay, then it can't be accurate. Li Wui laughed and said, well, but this array has given me a lot of inspiration. Let me comprehend it for a while. After saying that, He closed his eyes and stood there quietly. Yang Kai and Zhu Feng returned to the pavilion to chat and wait. After a full hour, Li Wuyi came back with a happy look on his face. He looked at Yang Kai and said, "When I return to Spirit Beast Island, you can go there and set up a spirit array on the island. It will be more convenient for everyone to come and go." Yang Kai laughed and said, "I can't ask for more." Li Wuyi had the ethereal spirit jade bead that Yang Kai had just refined. As long as there was a message, Yang Kai could immediately set off for Spirit Beast Island. It would not be difficult to set up another array. He said with a serious face, "There is one more thing I want to ask Senior." Li Wuyi said, "Go ahead." Yang Kai said, "When we were fighting with the two great sects, this area was sealed off, but when I carefully examined it, I didn't find any trace of a spirit array. I don't understand, without a spirit array, how did Kang Mo seal off this area?" Although he admitted that he cultivated the power of space, according to my observation, his attainments in the power of space are not very good. I'm afraid he is just a beginner. If that's the case, how did he have this ability? He had to figure out this problem. Otherwise, if he encountered a strong enemy in the future and was sealed, he would not even have a chance to escape. Seeing that Yang Kai was looking at him like he was thirsting for knowledge, Li Wuyi couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Zhu Feng, on the other hand, giggled beside him. Yang Kai asked curiously, "Why are you laughing, Senior? What's so funny about this question?" Zhu Feng laughed and said, "If you want to blame someone, blame that bastard Li Wuyi. It was not Kang Mo who sealed this world, but him." Yang Kai was surprised when he heard this. "You two had already arrived at that time?" Zhu Feng waved her hand and said, "That's not what I mean. Li Wuyi sighed, "Forget it, let me say it." He coughed lightly and said, "It's like this, Yang Kai, you also know that there are not many people in this world who cultivate the power of space. It's rare to meet someone who shares the same path as me. To be frank, if I hadn't met you today, there is almost no one in the entire star boundary who can communicate with me on this path. As the saying goes, it's lonely at the top. If someone asks me for advice on the power of space, I will not be stingy and teach them everything I know." Yang Kai said solemnly, "Junior admires Senior's benevolence." The embarrassment on Li Wuyi's face grew stronger. He stretched out his hand and scratched his chin. A few months ago, Kang Mo suddenly went to Spirit Beast Island, saying that he had some questions about the power of space. I chatted with him for a while. He looked at Yang Kai with an embarrassed expression and said, "Let's not talk about other things for the time being. One of them was how to use the most effective method to seal this world." Yang Kai opened his mouth wide and was stunned for a while before he recovered. "So, Kang Mo can seal this world because of Senior's teachings?" Li Wuyi clenched his fist and coughed lightly. "I have known Kang Mo for many years. Although we are not close friends, we are not bad. He has a little bit of attainment in the power of space. I really didn't expect his purpose to be to deal with you." Chapter 33-26. If he had known about Kang Mo's ulterior motives, how could Li Wuyi have imparted his experience to Yang Kai? Then again, he didn't know what kind of grievances there were between Yang Kai and Kang Mo. The difference in status and strength between them was too great. One was a fake emperor, a member of the Star Court, while the other was a rising star, a second-order emperor realm master. Barring any accidents, these two wouldn't cross paths for hundreds of years. That was why Li Wuyi didn't hide anything when Kang Mo went to ask for advice. Now that Yang Kai asked, Li Wuyi felt quite embarrassed. Although he didn't mean to, he still caused some trouble for Yang Kai. Fortunately, Yang Kai had a good foundation, otherwise, any other second-order Emperor Realm Master would have fallen into Kang Mo's hands. At that time, Kang Mo could decide his life or death. "So that's how it is." Yang Kai gently nodded and smiled. "Senior doesn't need to blame himself. Some people have ulterior motives, but this has nothing to do with Senior." Li Wuyi sweated. This Li is more or less responsible. Fortunately, nothing bad happened. Yang Kai changed the topic. "Then, what was the method Senior taught me?" With his attainments in the Tao of space, he was actually able to seal this part of the world without anyone noticing. "This little one is really curious about this." Li Wuyi said, "Space is self-contained and complete. Even if it is damaged by force, it will repair itself under the influence of the world principles. I think you should understand this. Yang Kai nodded. Naturally, this junior has also torn space countless times. Li Wuyi smiled slightly. Then, when you tore space, did you notice that there are strong and weak space barriers? Yang Kai nodded repeatedly. There are some places where space is extremely strong, but there are other places where space is relatively weak. Tearing space in those strong places will take twice the effort for half the effort, but in the weak places, space can be easily torn apart. Li Wuyi nodded. Yes, space is divided into weak and strong places, and those weak places are the so-called space nodes. Space nodes. Yang Kai raised his eyebrows. Li Wuyi waved his hand and the Tao of space fluctuated, covering an area of 1,000 meters. In your perception, how many space nodes are there in this space? Yang Kai closed his eyes to investigate, but after a while, he opened them and said, 3, to Senior's left, 150 meters behind you, and 170 meters to your right. There are 3. If you want to teleport, then, if you want to leave this place, how? But what if? As Li Wuyi spoke, the spatial laws changed again. Brilliant and solid, as if tangible objects were flooding the 3 spatial nodes. Yang Kai's was the space was Li Wu's space. Li Wuyi looked at him with a smile and retracted his divine path. Do you understand now? Yang Kai pondered for a while before raising his head and asking, what Senior means is that as long as I seal these space nodes, I can invisibly cut off the world so that I can't teleport away. That's right. Li Wuyi nodded. If heaven and earth are a bottle, then these space nodes are the holes in the bottle. When you and I teleport, we have to pass through these holes to escape this bottle, but once these holes are blocked, you and I can only be trapped in the bottle. This was not the first time Yang Kai had heard of heaven and earth as a bottle, but Li Wuyi's explanation was easy to understand. In fact, Yang Kai had been aware of this point for a long time and had been using it to his advantage, but after Li Wuyi's reminder, he suddenly felt enlightened. Senior's attainments in the space principles are naturally not a problem for you to block these space nodes, but how did Kang Mo do it? With his attainments in the Tao of space, even if he could detect these space nodes, it would be impossible for him to block them without anyone noticing, right? Li Wuyi explained, he must have used the power of some kind of artifact. At that time, I also gave him this suggestion. Now it seems that he must have found someone to refine something for him, but as for what that artifact was, I can't find it now. Your battle with him has already destroyed his seal. In fact, this method can indeed block heaven and earth, but if the battle is too intense, it can also break the seal. Yang Kai took a deep breath, but if he has the ability to crush me, he can capture me calmly. Kang Mo had calculated everything well, but the only thing he could not predict was Yang Kai's true strength. If it were any other second-order Emperor Realm Master, even if they were proficient in the space principles, they would definitely not be able to escape in that situation. But Kang Mo happened to encounter Yang Kai in his 300-meter-long dragon transformation and combined with his embodiment to fight him in an earth-shattering battle. But now that he understood the situation, it would not be so easy for others to target him in the future. At the very least, he could take precautions in advance. Even if the space nodes were really blocked again, he could find a way to break them before escaping. In the pavilion, the sun was setting and the moon was rising. Yang Kai and Li Wuyi sat opposite each other, chatting with each other. Ju Feng was accompanying them, looking a little bored. The two discussed and communicated for 3 full days. During these 3 days, Tang Sheng and Qian Xiuying of Heavenly Wolf Valley naturally came to visit several times. After all, Li Wuyi and Ju Feng were guests, so as hosts, they had to play host. Who knew that they would not even be able to see them face to face? Before they even got close to the pavilion, they could feel the space trembling, as if it would collapse at any time. Looking at the pavilion, Yang Kai and Li Wuyi would sometimes smile, sometimes reach out, and sometimes gesture something. This Yang Kai really has a bright future ahead of him. With just a second-order Emperor Realm cultivation, he can actually sit down and discuss the Tao with a master like Li Wuyi. When he grows up in the future, how can he be underestimated? Heavenly Wolf Valley really missed a God-given opportunity. Tang Sheng sighed in his heart. After living for so many years, his vision was still not as good as his disciples. 3 days later, Yang Kai was in high spirits, and Li Wuyi's eyes were also shining brightly. Although they had been sitting here and discussing the Tao of space, neither of them showed any signs of fatigue. On the contrary, they were in high spirits. Both of them had gained a lot. Yang Kai suddenly spoke, "Senior, this junior has a presumptuous request." Li Wuyi looked at him with a smile and said, "Do you want to fight with me?" Yang Kai was stunned. "Is my meaning that obvious?" Li Wuyi smiled slightly. "Your eyes are eager and full of fighting spirit. How can I not feel it?" Yang Kai nodded and said solemnly, "I have never fought with someone who is proficient in the Tao of space. Today, I would like to ask for Senior's guidance." Li Wuyi said, "What a coincidence, I also have the same idea." The two of them looked at each other and then their figures suddenly flickered. The next moment, they left the pavilion and stood 1,000 feet away from each other, as if they had already discussed this beforehand. Yang Kai said with a serious expression, "Senior's cultivation is exceedingly high. This junior will not show any mercy. Please be careful, Senior." Li Wuyi said, "Although I won't use my full strength, I won't hold back too much either. Don't lose too badly." Yang Kai grinned and shouted, "Senior, please take this." As he spoke, he clapped his hands together and a huge moon blade took shape. Yang Kai grinned. This is the divine technique of space that this junior comprehended, the moon blade. "Please take a look at it, Senior." As he spoke, the pitch-black moon blade whistled towards Li Wuyi. Li Wuyi's expression was solemn, condensing the power of the void and condensing the moon blade. "Not bad, not bad." As he spoke, although his expression was serious, his demeanor was relaxed. He didn't even try to dodge the moon blade. It wasn't until the huge moon blade was about to hit him that he suddenly reached out and waved his hand. Under the fluctuations of the space principles, the pitch-black moon blade suddenly disappeared. This space divine technique had been forcibly nullified by Li Wuyi's space principles. This was the first time in history that a moon blade had been nullified like this. "Senior's technique is amazing," Yang Kai praised, but his hands were not careless. With a flick of his fingers, a dense number of moon blades flew towards Li Wuyi, seemingly intent on killing him on the spot. Li Wuyi laughed in spite of himself. "The same trick won't work on me." A big hand slammed down from the sky and the moon blades disappeared without a trace before they could reach him. Suddenly, Li Wuyi's expression froze as he raised an eyebrow. "So you were hiding a killer move." Yang Kai grinned meaningfully and stretched out his hand, grabbing it as he shouted, "Exile." A huge black hole immediately appeared where Li Wuyi was standing. It was as if an invisible beast had opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. The black hole flickered and disappeared, along with Li Wuyi. Ju Feng exclaimed excitedly, "Did you kill him?" Cheongqi, who was watching from afar, glanced sideways at her, his face twitching as he thought, "What's wrong with this woman? Are you happy that Li Wuyi was killed? Aren't you guys in cahoots?" Yang Kai didn't answer, but instead, his expression became serious. Li Wuyi's voice suddenly rang out, "Boy, eat my fist too." As soon as his voice fell, a fist appeared in front of Yang Kai out of nowhere. There was no warning at all, and it was only a fist without an arm or a body. It was extremely strange, but judging from the color and size of the fist, it was undoubtedly Li Wuyi's fist. Yang Kai tried his best to defend himself, but he couldn't guard against such a strange attack from Li Wuyi. Caught off guard, it was too late for him to dodge. He could only activate the space principles and shout, "Nothingness." His figure became almost transparent in an instant as he banished himself into the void in an attempt to avoid this attack. "Huh!" Li Wuyi's soft voice sounded, seeming a little surprised, as if he didn't expect Yang Kai to be able to avoid his fist in this critical moment. But that was it. A layer of ripples suddenly appeared on the fist, and it disappeared without a trace. In the next moment, Yang Kai's figure reappeared not far away, but his expression was as if he was facing a great enemy, and as soon as he appeared, he disappeared again and merged into the void. After repeating this several times, Yang Kai suddenly stopped and patted his chest with a wry smile, shaking his head and saying, "Senior's methods are amazing, this boy admits defeat." Chapter 33-27. TSK, you admit defeat just like that? Ju Feng glanced over. It was rare for two people proficient in the Tao of space to fight, so she had thought that this battle would be earth-shattering, but who would have thought that Yang Kai would give up after just 2 or 3 moves? She was quite disappointed as she looked Yang Kai up and down and asked, "Did he hit you?" Yang Kai gently nodded but did not explain. Although Ju Feng was strong, she could not see Li Wuyi's attack at all because the punch had turned several times in the air and followed Yang Kai like a maggot. No matter how Yang Kai dodged, he could not avoid it. In the end, the punch gently landed on Yang Kai's body and retracted as he wished. In the competition of space divine technique, Yang Kai had undoubtedly lost. His methods were useless against Li Wuyi, but Li Wuyi was able to hit him. This point alone was enough to determine who was superior. Junior is very grateful to receive Senior's guidance today. Yang Kai cupped his fists solemnly. Junior will definitely continue to work hard and strive to defeat Senior one day. Li Wuyi laughed loudly. Good, I will wait for that day. Yang Kai smiled and said, now that this matter is over, Junior will take his leave. I will visit the two of you on Spirit Beast Island another day. Li Wuyi raised his hand and said, there's no hurry. Don't go yet. There is one more thing I need your help with. Yang Kai showed a puzzled look. What is it? Wait a moment, Li Wuyi said, and then his figure suddenly flashed and disappeared without a trace. Yang Kai could not detect any of his aura at all with his divine sense, so he knew that Li Wuyi must have used the space beacon to teleport somewhere at this moment. Turning his head to look at Ju Feng, Yang Kai asked. Ju Feng said, don't look at me, I don't know what it is either. Yang Kai nodded. Since Ju Feng said she did not know, she definitely did not know. It was useless to ask, so he simply waited patiently. Fortunately, in less than half a cup of tea's time, Space Force fluctuations suddenly rippled around Ju Feng, followed by Li Wuyi's figure reappearing with another person. It was a young girl with a butterfly-shaped mark on her face. The young girl's appearance was pitilessly beautiful, and her temperament was innocent and unaffected. However, the huge butterfly mark that covered half of her face destroyed her overall beauty. She wore a fitting green dress that accentuated her exquisite and graceful figure. As soon as she appeared, the girl looked around blankly and happened to meet Yang Kai's eyes. Little Seven? Yang Kai was surprised. Big brother Yang? Mo Xiaoqi's beautiful eyes lit up as her joy was beyond words. She rushed out from Li Wuyi's side and flew over to Yang Kai's side, but suddenly, as if realizing something, she hurriedly stopped and stood 10 meters away from Yang Kai, blushing as she asked, is it really you, Big Brother Yang? Of course it's me. Yang Kai smiled slightly and raised his hands to stroke his hair back, as if he wanted Mo Xiaoqi to see him more clearly. Why are you in the Eastern Territory? Mo Xiaoqi was pleasantly surprised as she pursed her red lips and asked. I came here to do something and happened to run into Senior Li and Senior Ju Feng. Mo Xiaoqi looked him up and down and pouted, you came to the Eastern Territory but didn't go to Spirit Beast Island to see me. Big brother Yang, have you forgotten about me long ago? Yang Kai smiled and said, no, I was planning to go to Spirit Beast Island, but I didn't know the way there, so I was delayed. Is that so? Mo Xiaoqi nodded and put her hands behind her back. She said in a happy and angry tone, well, remember to go to Spirit Beast Island immediately when you arrive in the Eastern Territory. I will remember, Yang Kai nodded repeatedly. Not far away, Li Wuyi and Ju Feng were watching silently and couldn't help but sigh. Ju Feng sent a divine sense message, the situation doesn't look good. Why did you bring this little girl here? Li Wuyi replied, a few days ago, when I sent a message to the Great Emperors, I mentioned that Yang Kai was going to Dragon Island. The Great Emperors asked me to go back and bring Xiaoqi here. They said that they wanted Xiaoqi and Yang Kai to go to Dragon Island to meet Mistress. Ju Feng understood after hearing this and sighed again, it's time to meet her. It's been more than 20 to 30 years. She hasn't seen her mother since she was born. Poor child, she kept asking me if she was picked up by the Great Emperors when she was young. Li Wuyi said, the last operation was too dangerous, so I didn't bring Xiaoqi with me. She caused a ruckus for a long time. These words reminded Ju Feng of what happened more than 10 years ago, and she couldn't help but shudder. Nodding, she said, "That's good. It's not a bad thing to see her, but the great emperors don't have to worry about Dragon Island. Well, with Mistress there, Dragon Island won't do anything to Xiao Qi. What's more, young boy is also going, so Dragon Island will have to worry about him this time. How could they care about Xiao Qi? Hey, the great emperors are really scheming. They want young boy to take the lead so Xiao Qi can confide in Mistress." While the two were quietly communicating with their divine senses, Yang Kai and Mo Xiao Qi were also whispering. After chatting for a while, Mo Xiao Qi pursed her lips and giggled while Yang Kai shook his head with a smile. Li Wuyi stepped forward and said, "Yang Kai, since you're going to Dragon Island this time, take Xiao Qi with you. Someone wants to see her." Hearing this, Yang Kai glanced at Mo Xiao Qi and understood. Knowing that Fu Xian missed her daughter, he secretly sent a message to Li Wuyi. "Does Xiao Qi know?" Li Wuyi nodded lightly and replied, "She knows. The great emperors didn't hide this matter from her, but I'll have to ask you to take care of her when the time comes." Yang Kai said seriously, "Senior, don't worry. Junior will not let anything happen to Xiao Qi." Li Wuyi smiled and said, "If they were worried, the great emperors wouldn't have let Xiao Qi come. Yen, when you're done, remember to send Xiao Qi back to Spirit Beast Island." "I'll remember." After saying that, he cupped his fists and said, "In that case, Junior will take his leave first. Be careful on the road." Li Wuyi nodded. Yang Kai turned his head and glanced into the distance where Lan He was looking at him. Yang Kai smiled and waved at her. Lan He was startled, but she obviously understood and waved back. However, Ling Yinqin was nowhere to be seen, and Yang Kai didn't want to disturb her. Instead, he called out to Chengqi and said, "Let's go." Chengqi stepped forward and glanced at Mo Xiao Qi, thinking to himself, no wonder young master was so repulsed by that name before. It turns out that there's a little girl called Xiao Qi. His fierce look made Mo Xiao Qi a little anxious, and she immediately had a thought in her mind, this old man isn't a good person. Chengqi squeezed out a smile at her while Mo Xiao Qi stuck out her tongue, looking frightened. Chengqi suddenly looked depressed. When he turned around, he saw Yang Kai looking straight at him, so he hurriedly straightened his face and asked, "Young master, do you have any other orders?" Yang Kai asked curiously, "What orders can I have? Since you recognized me as your master, it's your responsibility." Chengqi was at a loss, but he quickly recovered and said with a twitching face, "Young master, you can't be thinking of." Yang Kai looked at him sideways. Chengqi's old face was embarrassed as he dilly-dallied, his eyes drifting about. Yang Kai immediately cupped his fists to Li Wuyi, "Senior, I regret my words. Please use your divine technique to take this old thing away." Before his voice fell, Chengqi suddenly twisted and turned into a 5-meter-long, 3-meter-tall behemoth. It was shaped like a yak, with 2 horns on its head, fiery red skin, and a pair of fleshy wings that seemed to be able to cover the sky. It was an awe-inspiring and extraordinary sight. As it huffed and puffed, it breathed out hot air from its nostrils, visible to the naked eye. Yang Kai was delighted, thinking that this old thing was quite sensible. He walked around it a few times with a look of amazement on his face. With a flicker, he stood on Chengqi's back and beckoned to Mo Xiao Qi, "Come on up." Mo Xiao Qi was a little dumbfounded at this moment. Although there were many monster beasts on Spirit Beast Island, and there was even a divine spirit like the 9 Phoenix, she had never seen such an existence as a mount before. Especially when she saw the old man in human form before, Mo Xiao Qi instinctively felt repulsed at the thought of his ferocious face. But when Yang Kai beckoned her, she still jumped up happily. "Until we meet again." Yang Kai cupped his fists to Li Wuyi and Ju Feng and lightly tapped his foot. Chengqi flapped its wings and soared straight into the sky, instantly turning into a red light and flashing away at an incredible speed. But then again, if he didn't have such speed, Li Wuyi would have caught up with him long ago. How could he have the ability to escape from Li Wuyi's pursuit? Looking in the direction Yang Kai and the others left, Li Wuyi said, "Let's go back too." Ju Feng nodded. They came out this time mainly for Chengqi. Now that Chengqi had been taken away by Yang Kai, It was none of their business whether he was good or evil in the future. Yang Kai would be the one to discipline him, so it wouldn't be too late for them to act if things got out of hand. In the next moment, Li Wuyi activated the space law and disappeared on the spot with Ju Feng. After a long time, Tang Sheng, Qian Xiuying, and the others who were watching from afar went forward to check. After confirming that none of the guests were left, they let out a long sigh of relief. Although the Sky Wolf Valley felt honored to have distinguished guests, the difference in strength and status was too big, so it was very stressful to receive them. Now that they had safely sent them away, they were naturally relieved. Although they had left, there seemed to be fluctuations of the space law around the pavilion, and there was even a formation left behind. Tang Sheng and the others observed for a long time and confirmed that this was a space formation. They didn't know whether it was set up by Li Wuyi or Yang Kai, but they couldn't activate this formation after many attempts. They didn't dare to destroy it rashly, so they could only set this pavilion as a forbidden area, and ordinary disciples were not allowed to enter here. But after all, this was a place where two powerhouses who were proficient in the space law sat and discussed. Wouldn't it be a pity to waste it? Later, the Sky Wolf Valley selected some outstanding disciples to come here to meditate, wanting to see if they could comprehend anything here. If the Sky Wolf Valley had one more existence who cultivated the space law, it would be a great gain. Chapter 33-28. The sun was shining brightly in the blue sky. A red light streaked across the sky and disappeared in a flash. Even if someone noticed it occasionally, they would not be able to see the red light clearly. Cheongchi's speed could be described in one sentence. Fast, very fast, very fast. As expected of a veteran divine spirit, he was ranked very high among divine spirits. Although he was not as high as the dragon and phoenix, the name Cheongchi was still a famous signboard among divine spirits. What was rare was that Cheongchi's back was extremely spacious. Even when Yang Kai and Mo Xiaoqi sat opposite each other, it was not crowded. Mo Xiaoqi had spread a thick animal skin blanket on Cheongchi's back and was happily chatting with Yang Kai. The last time Yang Kai met Mo Xiaoqi was in the Shattered Star Sea. At that time, Mo Xiaoqi was enraged and the seal of the butterfly mark on her face was undone. She almost went berserk and it was Zhong Ruoshi who stepped in to suppress her. Many years had passed since then. However, the flowing time Great Emperor was fleeting, but friendship was everlasting. Mo Xiaoqi had lived most of her life on Spirit Beast Island since she was born. The first time she quietly ran away from home, she met Yang Kai in the Southern Territory. Naturally, she valued her only friend very much. In fact, Yang Kai was a bit confused now. How did Mo Xiaoqi run from the Eastern Territory to the Southern Territory? At that time, her strength was not high and the distance between the two territories was hundreds of millions of kilometers. How did she manage to cross such a long distance without any escort? Now that he thought about it, it was likely that Li Wuyi and Ju Feng had been secretly protecting her. Only this little girl thought that she had successfully run away from home and was complacent. Mo Xiaoqi lacked life experience, while Yang Kai had traveled far and wide, so naturally, they had a lot of topics to talk about, but most of the time, it was Yang Kai who was talking while Mo Xiaoqi just cupped her cheeks in her hands and listened quietly, a look of relish on her face. When they talked about the old swindler they met in Maplewood City, the two laughed tacitly. Back then, the two of them really had eyes but failed to see. The great emperors of the secular world had transformed into thousands of people to play the game in the world, but they were actually treated as liars by them. They even bore a grudge against them. However, as time passed, Yang Kai clearly noticed that Mo Xiaoqi's mood had changed, becoming nervous, expectant, and hesitant. This phenomenon became more obvious the closer they got to Dragon Island. Clearly, she was also very nervous in her heart. She was going to the Dragon Island to see her mother this time. She also didn't know what kind of attitude she should use to face that woman who gave birth to her yet never met. In the end, the little girl had become extremely silent. Even if Yang Kai deliberately tried to find some interesting topics to tease her, he could only get a very forced smile in return. Yang Kai couldn't do anything about it, so he could only let her adjust her mood. Of course, Cheongchi knew the way to the Dragon Island. Therefore, He did not need to use the Dragon Island token to confirm his location on this trip to Yangkai. After a few days, Cheongchi landed on a small island above the blue waves of the sea. Is this the island closest to Dragon Island? Yangkai turned his head and looked around, asking casually. Cheongchi replied in a low voice, "Young master, there is no island closer than this one within 1,000 kilometers." He also didn't know why Yangkai wanted to find such an island, but since Yangkai had ordered him to do so, he would just do as he was told. Here it is then. Yangkai nodded and jumped down from Cheongchi's back with Mo Xiaoqi. With a sweep of his divine sense, he found a suitable place. Big brother Yang, what are you doing here? Mo Xiaoqi looked around curiously. There were countless small islands like this in the sea, and there was nothing special about them, let alone any precious treasure. However, Yangkai asked Cheongchi to find such a place first. To arrange a space array. Yangkai explained. Dragon Island was the same as the sealed world bead. It was a world of its own, with its own world principles. Therefore, even if Yangkai arranged a space array on Dragon Island, it wouldn't be able to communicate with other space arrays because the world principles of Dragon Island isolated the connection between space arrays. Yangkai reckoned that he would have to deal with Dragon Island in the future. The distance between them was too far, so it would be inconvenient for him to come and go. If he left a space array here, it would be much easier for him to come and go in the future. Although they still had to travel some distance, it was better than flying all the way here from the ancient wild lands. Mo Xiaoqi nodded. Although she didn't understand Yangkai's intention, she didn't ask and just followed behind him obediently. Not long after, the two arrived at a cave. This cave should be natural, somewhere on the side of the island near the sea, extending all the way to the interior of the island. The interior was dry, but it was a natural haven. Yangkai immediately got busy, and Mo Xiaoqi also helped from the side. However, her help was more of a hindrance. Yangkai didn't blame her, but gave her a lot of encouragement, which finally helped her to recover a lot. Half a day later, a brand new space array was arranged. Yangkai checked it, and after confirming that there were no problems, he walked out of the cave with Mo Xiaoqi. Sitting back on Cheongchi's back, he didn't expect the old guy to flap his wings and ask, "Young master, are we really going to Dragon Island?" Yangkai smiled and said, "Why, are you afraid?" Cheongchi bared his teeth and said, "I'm not afraid, but that damned Dragon Island is too xenophobic. Young master must be careful there." In fact, he was curious about the relationship between Yangkai and the dragon race. When he saw Yangkai transform into a 300-meter-long dragon, he knew that he had the bloodline of the dragon race, but the dragon race was extremely disgusted with those with impure bloodlines. This kind of disgust was even worse than their rejection of other races. If Yangkai really had the half-dragon bloodline, it would be best to avoid the dragon race forever. Why would he want to go to Dragon Island? Wasn't this just walking right into a trap? Cheongchi wanted to remind Yangkai that there was a half-dragon city on Dragon Island, where there were many half-dragon bloodline existences. Although they seemed powerful, they were actually under house arrest on Dragon Island. When the dragon race needed them, they would be taken to Dragon Island to have their blood drained to cultivate the dragon blood flower. If Yangkai went there, he might be trapped in Half-Dragon City and be taken to have his blood drained. With the half-dragon bloodline, transforming into a 300-meter-long dragon body, he would have a lot of blood drained. Although he didn't like Yangkai using him as a mount, if Yangkai really fell into Dragon Island and lost his freedom, the spiritual beast island would definitely hunt him down. For his own sake, he had to remind Yangkai. Yangkai grinned and said, "No matter how xenophobic they can't drive me away. If they provoke me, I will beat them up one by one." Cheongchi couldn't help but roll his eyes when he heard that. He thought to himself, this new young master really knows how to brag. Although your strength is not bad, you can even fight with someone like Kang Mo, but what kind of place is Dragon Island? That is the gathering place of the dragon race, the resting place of dozens of huge dragons. Even if I go there, I will have to tuck my tail between my legs, otherwise, I will definitely be beaten up and thrown out of Dragon Island. Especially that old dragon Zhu Yang, if he really goes all out, even the great emperors won't be able to do anything to them. I am definitely not their match, and you want to beat them up with your strength. What kind of joke is this? I have lived for so many years, and this is the first time I heard such fresh and refined boasting. What? You don't believe me? Yang Kai seemed to have sensed Chengqi's thoughts. He leaned over and asked. Chengqi said, I believe. Why wouldn't I believe? Young Master's divine technique is unparalleled. What can a mere dragon race amount to? Seems like you don't believe me. Yang Kai sneered. He rolled his eyes and said, if I can make those dragon race obedient, what will you do? Chengqi glared at him. If young master can really do this, I will sincerely recognize you as my young master. If young master has any command in the future, I will not dare to disobey. Yo! Yang Kai said sarcastically, listening to your words, you don't sincerely recognize me as your young master. Chengqi shook his head and said, I am forced by the situation, I have no other choice. Young master is a sensible person, why do you have to point it out? Yang Kai nodded, you are still considered honest. If you are really obedient to me, I will suspect if you have some other purpose. Hehe, young master, please don't blame me. This old man has no other choice. However, if you can really make those dragons submit to you, then you naturally have the qualifications to be this old man's master. Following you wouldn't be an insult to this old man. Chengqi paused, then said, but if young master can't do it, I only have one request. Speak. Chengqi smiled and said, in the future, don't use me as a mount. Although I was once a mount for the flowing time great emperor, I am now quite old, I have to consider my face. Okay. Yang Kai nodded. Chengqi's expression brightened, he was overjoyed. This brat's words were bigger than the sky, this time you are bound to lose. Although he didn't reject following Yang Kai, he was still a little unhappy that Yang Kai used him as a mount. The flowing time great emperor is the great emperors of the flowing time great emperor. Although you have practiced the flowing time great emperor's shuttle seal and understood a little bit of the law of time, you can barely be considered as the successor of the flowing time great emperor, but how can you be compared to the flowing time great emperor, or even do the same thing as the flowing time great emperor? Young master, the Dragon Island is just below, the two of you sit tight. Chengqi suddenly shouted in a low voice. Its huge body dived down, and directly fell into the sea below. Before his figure arrived, the seawater had already separated by itself, revealing a circular passage leading to the bottom of the sea. Along the way, not a single drop of water touched his body. In a trance, a huge void passageway appeared in the depths of the sea, leading to an unknown place. Yang Kai had experienced this kind of scene before, he naturally knew that the void passageway was leading to the Dragon Island. If he didn't use the Dragon Island medallion to locate it last time, he wouldn't have thought that the entrance to the Dragon Island was actually under the sea. It was obviously not the first time Chengqi came to the Dragon Island, he dived into the void passageway without the slightest hesitation. In a split second, the surrounding seawater disappeared, and was replaced by a primal chaos void. It seemed like even the surrounding space and time were frozen. Hey! Chengqi suddenly cried out in surprise, because this void passageway gave him a kind of murderous feeling. The last time he came here, it was not like this. Moreover, he couldn't find the exit as far as the eye could see. In a split second, his expression tensed up, if he got lost in the void, it would be over. Chapter 33-29. Just as he was feeling nervous, Yang Kai's voice rang in his ears. Only then did he remember that this new young master of his was proficient in the Tao of space. No matter who got lost here, it was impossible for him to get lost. Immediately, he followed Yang Kai's instructions without hesitation. Going around in circles, it was as if he was walking through a huge maze. After a long time, a bright light suddenly appeared in front of him. Chengqi didn't need any guidance this time as he knew that was definitely the entrance. Flapping his wings, he quickly flew in that direction and rushed out in the blink of an eye. His vision blurred and the world changed. Rich world energy rushed out and the world principles, which were slightly different from those of the star boundary, lingered around. They had arrived at Dragon Island. However, at this moment, a loud dragon roar shook the sky as a purple aura came from the east. In an instant, A giant dragon more than 100 meters long appeared in front of them. This giant dragon was shrouded in purple aura, had 2 horns on its head, and was covered in fluorescent dragon scales. In an instant, it blocked in front of Cheongchi. Raising its head high, dragon pressure filled the air as it looked down and shouted in a thunderous voice, "Who dares trespass on Dragon Island?" The voice wasn't loud and was instead a little shrill. This giant dragon was obviously a female dragon. As soon as these words came out, the female dragon's eyes narrowed. "Cheongchi? It's actually you, old thing." She obviously recognized Cheongchi. Cheongchi shook his head as steam visible to the naked eye came out of his nostrils, standing proudly in the void, not showing the slightest fear. A giant dragon more than 100 meters long was at most a 6th-order dragon vein. This kind of dragon race really couldn't do anything to him. What's more, he had been ordered to come here this time and Yang Kai would take care of everything, so he simply kept his mouth shut. On Cheongchi's back, Mo Xiaoqi looked up. This was the first time she had seen a pure dragon race, so she was naturally very curious. Does my mother look like this when she shows her true form? But why don't I have the slightest dragon race bloodline? Heh! The purple dragon's gaze suddenly turned to Cheongchi's back and fixed on Yang Kai, a look of surprise bursting forth as she exclaimed, "Brother-in-law? Brother-in-law?" Cheongchi was confused by this address. Who was your brother-in-law? Who could be your brother-in-law here? I definitely have nothing to do with the dragon race, and Mo Xiaoqi is a woman. Could it be? Thinking of this, Cheongchi's expression changed greatly. Yang Kai's voice came from behind. It was hard to tell whether he was happy or angry. You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. Who is your brother-in-law? The purple dragon didn't care at all. With a turn of its body, it twisted and transformed into a girl in purple clothes. It was Fu Ling who led Yang Kai to the place where the dragon bloodflower was cultivated. On the entire Dragon Island, there were no more than 20 members of the dragon race. These dragon race bloodlines were all extremely pure, but there were also differences in strength. The strongest, such as the Great Elder and Second Elder, had 10th-order bloodlines. Fu Xian, Zhu Kong, and Zhu Qing had 9th-order bloodlines. After that, there were 8th-order, 7th-order, 6th-order, and even 5th-order bloodlines. The bloodline of the dragon race would gradually become purer over time. It could be said that the longer one lived, the higher the grade of their bloodline. Of course, this did not exclude the natural advantages and the benefits of consuming the dragon blood flower. And this Fu Ling was a 6th-order bloodline purple dragon. Last time, she was forced by Yang Kai to take her to the place where the dragon blood flower was cultivated, but as a result, Yang Kai had swept away almost all the mature dragon blood flowers there. After that incident, Fu Ling was naturally punished and sent here to guard the entrance to Dragon Island. If it wasn't because the elders knew about the strangeness of Yang Kai's bloodline, Fu Ling wouldn't be able to resist at all. Just this alone was enough to banish her to the dragon tomb, never to see the light of day again. After Fu Ling revealed her true form, she immediately stood on Cheongchi's back, facing Yang Kai. The distance between them was less than a foot. A delicate fragrance immediately assaulted Yang Kai's nostrils. With her hands behind her back, like a little girl who didn't know much about the world, she leaned her head over and giggled, "Of course it's you. In this world, who else can be called brother-in-law by me, Fu Ling?" Yang Kai unconsciously leaned back, mainly because he was afraid that her towering chest would touch him. Seeing this, Fu Ling was a little insatiable. She deliberately stuck out her chest, causing Yang Kai's face to darken. He said in a deep voice, "I am not related to you in any way. How can I be your brother-in-law? Miss Fu Ling, please don't joke around." Fu Ling giggled, "I'm not joking. If I say you are my brother-in-law, then you are my brother-in-law." Saying so, she actually took another step forward. Before Yang Kai could retreat, Mo Xiaoqi suddenly rushed out from behind and squeezed herself between Yang Kai and Fu Ling, spreading her arms as if she wanted to protect Yang Kai. Her face flushed red. She said, "What are you doing? Why are you sticking so close to me when you want to talk?" She obviously saw Fu Ling's ulterior motives and immediately felt a sense of anger, as if someone was coveting her beloved object. Fu Ling looked Mo Xiaoqi up and down and snorted, Where did this ugly girl come from? I am talking to my brother-in-law, what does it have to do with you? Go away, be careful or this great-aunt will beat you. Mo Xiaoqi had never experienced such a situation before. On Spirit Beast Island, she was the little princess of the Spirit Beast Island. She had never seen such a ferocious look on Fu Ling's face before, so she couldn't help trembling in fear. However, she still firmly spread her arms and stood there angrily. Yang Kai looked at Fu Ling coldly and asked, "Who do you want to beat?" Fu Ling felt the coldness in his voice and thought of something. She smiled and said, "Oh, brother-in-law, don't be angry. I am just playing with her." "But brother-in-law, it's fine that you came to see elder sister Qing, but why did you bring a little girl with you? If elder sister Qing knows about this..." She winked at Yang Kai with an expression that said, "You know what I am thinking, it's none of your business." Yang Kai snorted and looked around. He then asked curiously, "Why didn't you stay on Dragon Island? Why did you come here?" This place was just the entrance, and it was still some distance away from the real Dragon Island. The real Dragon Island was called the Dragon Palace by the people of Half-Dragon City, and the dragon race lived in the Dragon Palace. Under normal circumstances, the dragon race would not leave the Dragon Palace. It would have been better if Yang Kai didn't ask this question. Once Yang Kai asked this question, Fu Ling's expression collapsed. She had an aggrieved look on her face as she sobbed and said, "Brother-in-law, I am in deep trouble because of you." Yang Kai snorted and said, "What does it have to do with me?" Fu Ling's eyes turned red, and 2 drops of tears actually squeezed out of her eyes. She looked at Yang Kai with watery eyes and said, "Brother-in-law, did you forget about those dragon blood flowers?" Dragon blood flowers? Yang Kai was stunned for a moment. He clenched his fist and coughed lightly. "Why are you talking about dragon blood flowers again?" Fu Ling said, "Last time, I took you to steal a lot of dragon blood flowers. After you left, the elders found out about this and wanted to banish me to the dragon tomb. Fortunately, the 3rd elder and elder sister Qing were kind and said some good words to let me avoid this calamity. But as a punishment, I have to guard the entrance here for 100 years. While speaking, Fu Ling's tears flowed non-stop. It seemed that she was really sad. Originally, she wasn't the one who stole the dragon blood flowers. She was also forced to do so. In the end, she was punished to guard the entrance for 100 years. She couldn't even go back to the Dragon Palace. In the end, she was screwed by Yang Kai. That was more than 1,000 dragon blood flowers, low grade, middle grade, high grade, and even the 2 best grade dragon blood flowers that the 1st elder and 2nd elder had carefully cultivated for many years were all swept away by Yang Kai. The accumulation of the dragon race for thousands of years could be said to have all gone into Yang Kai's pocket. If they wanted to restore the dragon race to its original state, it would be impossible without thousands of years of accumulation. And within these thousands of years, the dragon race on the Dragon Island would no longer have the opportunity to take the dragon blood flowers to improve their bloodline. This greatly delayed the time for the dragon race to become powerful. In these 10 years, Fu Ling hated Yang Kai to death in her heart. More than once, she thought of killing him when she saw him again. But it was only a thought. She also knew that she was no match for Yang Kai. The suppression of their bloodline was too strong. Not to mention, she had already offered her soul brand to Yang Kai. Her life and death were all in the hands of Yang Kai. Now that she finally met the victim, she naturally wanted to pour her heart out to him. Of course, there was another more important reason that she didn't want others to know. This brother-in-law of hers seemed to have the ability to rapidly improve the bloodline of the dragon race. Didn't you see that big sister Qing's bloodline was originally at the 8th rank, but now she was already at the 9th rank and was promoted to the position of an elder? As long as her plan succeeded, her 6th rank bloodline could be easily upgraded to the 7th or 8th rank. It would be more effective than taking the dragon blood flower. It's only 100 years, it's not a long time for you. Yang Kai sniffed. Although he was somewhat ashamed of Fu Ling's character, but in the end, he was the one who had harmed Fu Ling. Yang Kai felt somewhat apologetic in his heart. However, he didn't want to dwell on this matter too much. He didn't want Fu Ling to have something to use against him. He waved his hand and said, "The past is the past, why bring it up? Let me ask you, where is Ju Qing right now?" Fu Ling's face was filled with resentment, but she didn't dare to not answer. Big Sister Qing is on her own spiritual island. What about the third elder? He is also on his own spiritual island. She suddenly rolled her eyes and said, "Brother-in-law, do you not know the way? Do you want me to bring you there?" Yang Kai looked at her and said, "Aren't you being punished to guard here for 100 years? Nothing will happen if you leave without permission, right?" "No, no." Fu Ling pursed her lips and smiled sweetly. "I have been guarding here for more than 10 years, and no one came in. Only brother-in-law and you have come in. It's not a big deal to leave for a while. Don't blame me if something happens." Fu Ling didn't want to give up and said, "Do I look like someone who pesters endlessly? Brother-in-law, you are looking down on me. Stop talking nonsense, quickly lead the way." En. Fu Ling answered repeatedly. Then, she lifted her leg and stomped on Cheongqi. "Old man, why are you still in a daze? Hurry up and walk. Walk forward. Don't tell me you don't know where the Dragon Palace is." Cheongqi couldn't help but roll his eyes. She really lost her moral integrity after being a mount for a day. A little girl from the dragon race actually dared to order him around on his back. But, what exactly was going on? Why did this dragon lady address young Kai as her brother-in-law? Could it be that this young lord really had an affair with a dragon lady? Chapter 33:30. Thinking of this, Cheongqi couldn't help but feel happy. Although they were both divine spirits, the arrogance of the dragon race was something that no race liked, and naturally, Cheongqi didn't like it. Such a proud dragon race actually has such an unimaginable relationship with a human. Now, he really wanted to see what this dragon girl looked like. This old master wants to see if those stinky dragons still dare to be arrogant in front of this old master in the future after this scandal. Along the way, on Cheongqi's back, Fu Ling chattered endlessly, intentionally or unintentionally trying to get close to Yang Kai. If it weren't for Mo Xiaoqi standing off to the side vigilantly, it was likely she would have stuck close to him. Such enthusiasm made Yang Kai feel overwhelmed, and he couldn't help but wonder if there was something wrong with this female dragon. Logically speaking, since he had cheated her so miserably, shouldn't she hold a grudge against him? Why was she trying to please him? If the dragon race were all like her, how could there be any dignity left? The blue sea faced the sky, and the waves rose and fell. Empty spirit islands with many precious treasures flashed under the group's feet. The treasures on Dragon Island could be said to be extremely rich, but these treasures that would make a cultivator in the outside world extremely jealous were nothing in the eyes of the dragon race, because each of them was extremely powerful, so these things were useless to them. The only useful thing was the dragon blood flower, but it was almost destroyed by Yang Kai. Galloping all the way, after 2 full days, a half-moon-shaped island appeared in front of them. This island covered an area of 100 kilometers, which wasn't very big, but it wasn't small either. It was more than enough for a dragon race to live in. "That's Elder Sister Qing's Spirit Island." Fu Ling pointed at the Crescent Moon Island and said in a desolate tone. Although he had been traveling with Yang Kai for the past 2 days, he hadn't been able to ease the relationship between him and Yang Kai. On the contrary, he had been too enthusiastic, causing Fu Ling to be on guard. There was also that little girl who was guarding against him like he was a thief. If it weren't for Yang Kai's face, he would have already slapped her to death. However, it was this little girl who was watching him all the time. As long as he made the slightest move, it would arouse her vigilance. "This is where Qing'er lives." Yang Kai revealed a shocked expression. He had been to this island before. Previously, in order to search for Zhu Qing's traces, he had gone to many places and stepped on many spiritual islands. At that time, there was no one here. He did not expect this to be Zhu Qing's spiritual island. Fu Ling smiled and said, "That's right, Elder Sister Qing should be on this island." She and the third elder were punished to stay on the Dragon Island to reflect on their mistakes. If it wasn't for an accident, they wouldn't be able to leave the Dragon Island for at least 100 years. "Brother-in-law, if you miss her, you can visit her more often." Yang Kai snorted, 100 years? This is the second elder's order." Fu Ling stuck out her tongue and said, "Other than the second elder, who else can give such an order? Everyone is most afraid of the second elder." All right, since we are already here, there is no need for you to guide the rest of the way. Go and do what you are supposed to do. Yang Kai waved his hand. Fu Ling pouted and said, brother-in-law is too heartless. After using me, you toss me aside. I don't want to. It's rare for me to come back, I don't want to go back so early. I also want to visit elder sister Qing. Yang Kai looked at her from the corner of his eyes. Do you believe that I will teach you a lesson? After saying that, he made a hand seal. Fu Ling's expression immediately changed. She jumped down from Cheongchi's back in a flash and said with a hollow laugh, brother-in-law, what are you doing? I won't disturb you and elder sister Qing, okay? She cursed in her heart. He really doesn't understand the situation. She sent herself to him and yet he is still unmoved. I really don't know if he is still a man. Yang Kai waved his hand at her. Only then did Fu Ling said reluctantly, brother-in-law, you must come and visit me when you have time. I am very depressed over there by myself. Yang Kai couldn't be bothered with her. He urged Cheongchi to turn into a red light and landed on the Crescent Moon Island. There was a simple and unadorned palace on the Crescent Moon Island. When Cheongchi's huge body landed from the sky, a graceful figure had already flashed out of the palace. Her beautiful eyes looked over and met with Yang Kai's gaze. When their eyes met, Yang Kai grinned. Zhu Qing was pleasantly surprised and said, you're back? Last time when Yang Kai left the Dragon Palace Hall and chased after Wukong, Zhu Qing was naturally worried. Although Wukong was no longer at his peak, he was still the great emperors of the heaven-devouring Great Emperor. No one knew if Yang Kai was his opponent. Now that she saw Yang Kai return in one piece, the stone in Zhu Qing's heart that had been hanging in her heart was finally put down. As soon as she finished speaking, she had already pounced over. Yang Kai opened his arms and pulled her into his embrace, gently smelling the fragrance of her hair. Cheongchi didn't feel good. Originally, he was somewhat unwilling to be ordered around by Yang Kai as a mount. Now, this adulterous couple was actually kissing each other on his back in broad daylight, as if there was no one else around. Unfortunately, he couldn't get angry. He immediately stiffened and didn't dare to move, so as not to disturb these two people. However, at this moment, his heart was filled with an indescribable shock. There really was something going on. His young master really had something going on with a dragon girl. This was earth-shattering news. He had lived for tens of thousands of years, but he had never encountered such a thing. Although Zhu Qing didn't reveal her true body, he could feel the purity of this dragon girl's bloodline. If they really fought one-on-one, he most likely wouldn't be her opponent. 9th rank. 10th rank. With such a pure bloodline, her status on Dragon Island was definitely not low. At the very least, she would be an elder-level character. How could such an existence have a relationship with the young master? Could it be that the young master's half-dragon bloodline was also related to this dragon girl? While he was lost in thought, Yang Kai and Zhu Qing were rubbing each other's ears. Although they hadn't said a word, they could feel each other's longing. All of a sudden, Zhu Qing felt that someone was looking at her. She opened her eyes and saw a pair of bright eyes. Mo Xiaoqi stood behind Yang Kai, her eyes wide open as she stared at the scene in front of her in a daze, somewhat unable to accept it. What she saw in front of her had a great impact on her mind. Inexplicably, she felt a burst of bitterness in her heart and almost burst into tears. Being stared at like this, Zhu Qing blushed slightly and gently broke away from Yang Kai's embrace, saying with a smile, "This girl is." Yang Kai didn't feel embarrassed at all and quietly whispered in her ear with a carefree expression. Zhu Qing's beautiful eyes lit up when she heard this and stepped forward, holding Mo Xiaoqi's hands affectionately, so it's little sister Xiaoqi. Although she and Fu Xian were both elders of the dragon race, Fu Xian was her elder, so calling her little sister Xiaoqi was not a problem. Moreover, she had heard of this girl's existence a long time ago, but it was not until today that she had seen her face. Mo Xiaoqi was obviously shocked by her affectionate behavior. Her mind was already in a mess, but now she was even more at a loss. Opening her mouth, she seemed to want to say something, but no words came out and she just turned her head to look at Yang Kai. Yang Kai smiled and said, "This is Zhu Qing, if you don't mind, you can call her elder sister Qing." Elder sister Qing. Mo Xiaoqi called out softly, her voice sounding like she was about to cry. She then plunged into Zhu Qing's arms and started sobbing, weeping like a pear blossom in the rain, drenching Zhu Qing's clothes in an instant. Zhu Qing was dumbfounded. Looking up at Yang Kai, she found that Yang Kai also had a blank expression on his face. Did you bully her? Zhu Qing opened her mouth and asked silently. Yang Kai spread out his hands, with an expression that said it had nothing to do with him. He really didn't know why Mo Xiaoqi suddenly burst into tears like this. Mo Xiaoqi didn't know why she suddenly wanted to cry, so she plunged into Zhu Qing's arms. Zhu Qing was helpless and could only hug Mo Xiaoqi, gently patting her back and comforting her softly. Yang Kai wiped the cold sweat on his forehead, secretly rejoicing that this scene was not seen by martial beast, otherwise, the great emperors would skin him alive. But thinking about it carefully, he somewhat understood Mo Xiaoqi's mood. Now that they had arrived at Dragon Island and she was about to see her mother, it was inevitable that her mood would fluctuate. Under such a mood, if she was slightly stimulated, she would definitely vent. Her crying continued, but Zhu Qing didn't show the slightest impatience and continued to speak gently. After a long time, Mo Xiaoqi stopped sobbing and walked out of Zhu Qing's arms with her head lowered. Wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, her face was so red that it looked like blood was about to drip. So embarrassing. This is the first time I see elder sister Qing and I actually cried in her arms. Who knows what she will think of me? She quietly looked up and saw Zhu Qing's concerned face, not the slightest trace of ridicule. Only then did she relax a little. Looking at Yang Kai again, she saw that he was actually smiling, as if he was watching a good show. She immediately stomped her foot. Big brother Yang is a bad guy. Saying so, she turned around and rushed into Zhu Qing's palace, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Yang Kai was dumbfounded. Pointing at himself, he asked Zhu Qing, "What does this have to do with me?" Zhu Qing glared at him and was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. She chased after Mo Xiaoqi, leaving Yang Kai and Qiongqi shivering in the sea breeze. After a long while, Yang Kai said, "Old Qiong, don't you think women are strange?" Qiongqi nodded in agreement. If they weren't strange, they wouldn't be called women. Yang Kai said, "Old Qiong, you also have this kind of experience." Hiss, speaking of which, is there a female in your Qiongqi clan? Qiongqi rolled his eyes and said, "Otherwise, do you think this old master jumped out of a stone?" Yang Kai grinned meaningfully. "I'm just curious, just curious." After a pause, he said, "You stay here for the time being. Don't run around if you have nothing to do. I will take you away after I deal with the matters here. Young master, rest assured, this old master understands. This was Dragon Island, how could he dare to be disobedient here?" After hesitating for a moment, he reminded, "Young master must also be careful. The dragon race is not so easy to deal with. Especially since you have an ambiguous relationship with a dragon girl. How can Great Elder Zhu Yang and Second Elder Fu Sai let you go so easily?" Chapter 33-31. Inside the bedroom, when Yang Kai walked in, Zhu Qing was holding Mo Xiaoqi's hand and whispering something to her. He didn't know what they were talking about, but Mo Xiaoqi's face bloomed with a smile. After a long time, she suddenly shook her head, looking embarrassed and nervous. Zhu Qing patiently consoled her, and after a long time, she gently nodded. After that, Zhu Qing walked over and winked at Yang Kai. The two left together. "What did you say to her?" Yang Kai hugged Zhu Qing, one of his hands wandering around her body while he asked. Zhu Qing patted his big hand away and said, "I asked her when she was going to see Third Elder. She seemed a little scared." Yang Kai heard this and said, "It's only human nature. She has been in a contradictory state of anticipation and nervousness all the way here, and it's even more obvious here. What's wrong? She doesn't want to see her mother." Zhu Qing said, "It's not that she doesn't want to, she's just very nervous. But since she's like this, let's go and invite Third Elder." "All right," Yang Kai nodded. The two immediately set off for the Spirit Island where Third Elder lived. The Spirit Island where Third Elder lived was not far from Zhu Qing's Crescent Island, so the two arrived in less than an incense stick worth of time. The scenery on the Spirit Island was beautiful, with mountains stacked on top of each other. What was rare was that there was a huge waterfall rushing down from the peak, a curtain of water connecting the sky and the earth. Before they arrived, they could already hear the rumbling sound of the waterfall. Below the waterfall was a valley with several pavilions, where third elder Fu Xian lived. Zhu Qing led Yang Kai to this place and saw a woman in an aqua blue palace dress fiddling with some flowers and plants. Her demeanor was gentle, and her temperament was gentle. Seeming to notice something, Fu Xian looked up and smiled at Zhu Qing before fixing her eyes on Yang Kai. Third elder. Zhu Qing stepped forward and saluted. Yang Kai also cupped his fists and said, "Greetings, third elder." Fu Xian smiled and nodded. "You're here?" She had also met Yang Kai last time and knew about the relationship between Yang Kai and Zhu Qing. The relationship between these two was almost the same as her own relationship with Mo Huang. Both had violated a great taboo on Dragon Island, but the only difference was that she and Mo Huang already had a child, so there was no room for negotiation. On the other hand, Yang Kai and Zhu Qing had not yet reached this point, so Fu Xian felt a sense of kinship between them. Although she was not familiar with Yang Kai, she did not feel the slightest sense of unfamiliarity at this moment. This was also the first time Yang Kai seriously sized up Fu Xian. The last time he saw her, she was banished to the dragon graveyard for more than 10 years. She had just escaped and was in her weakest state. Her face was pale and pitiful. Right now, she had undoubtedly recovered. But looking at her beautiful face and peaceful eyes, she didn't have the slightest bit of arrogance that the dragon race should have. He also heard from Zhu Qing just now that the third elder was a water dragon. Her temperament was also the most gentle among the dragon race on Dragon Island. If he knew her well enough, he would discover that she was more like a recluse compared to the dragon race. Seeing is believing. Fu Xian's every move gave people a feeling of being bathed in a spring breeze. Compared to the second elder, Fu Dun, it was simply the difference between heaven and earth. Thinking about Fu Dun, Kai Yang felt a little sick in his heart. He didn't know how that old guy Zhu Yang could stand it. The last time you chased after Wukong, you only came back after so many years. Did you encounter any accident? Yang Kai shook his head and said, "There was no accident, but I made Qing'er worried." Fu Xian nodded her head and said, "Qing'er is indeed worried. She also didn't know after being with me all these years, third elder." Zhu Qing hastily interrupted her and went straight to the topic. "Today, Yang Kai came here because he has a very good news to tell you." Fu Xian pursed her lips and smiled. "What kind of good news can I have? A little girl like you only knows how to talk nonsense." Zhu Qing said with a smile, "Little Seven came to see you. I wonder if this can be considered a good news." Little Seven? Fu Xian's expression changed when she heard that. Her beautiful eyes that were always as gentle as water actually burst forth with astonishing radiance at this moment. She turned her head and looked at Yang Kai excitedly. "Little Seven came?" Yang Kai nodded and said, "Martial Beast Master knew that I was going to come to Dragon Island, so he entrusted little sister Xiao Qi to me and asked me to bring her to see you." After getting an affirmative answer, Fu Xian couldn't help but tremble. She looked behind Yang Kai, but there was no trace of her. She asked bitterly, "Where is she? Is she here?" With the purity of her ninth order dragon bloodline and supreme divine spirit cultivation, if Mo Xiaoqi really came here, she would have discovered it immediately. But at this moment, she asked such a question. Obviously, her mind was a little chaotic and she had lost the ability to recognize. It was easy to imagine how much of a shock her daughter came to see her. Yang Kai shook his head and said, "She is waiting for you on Qing'er's Crescent Moon Island." Zhu Qing said, "Little sister Xiao Qi seems to be a little scared, so she didn't dare to come." How could Fu Xian listen to her explanation at this moment? There was only one voice echoing in her mind, "Little Seven is here, Little Seven is here, Little Seven is here to see me. She is not far from me, I will see her soon." After so many years, since she was separated from her infant daughter, this was the first time she had been so close to her daughter, the first time she had any hope of seeing her again. Almost without waiting for Zhu Qing to finish speaking, Fu Xian's figure flickered and turned into a stream of light that shot towards Crescent Moon Island. Yang Kai and Zhu Qing glanced at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's eyes, but they could also understand the mother and daughter's mood at the moment. "Let's follow her and see," Yang Kai said as he grabbed Zhu Qing's hand and chased after her. Since Martial Beast had entrusted Mo Xiaoqi to him, he naturally had to fulfill his duty. Although he felt that with Mo Xiaoqi's character, she wouldn't do anything disobedient on her first meeting with Fu Xian, it was still better to see this with his own eyes. After another stick of incense worth of time, the two returned to Crescent Moon Island. In front of the palace, Fu Xian, who had gone ahead of them, had already arrived, but she did not walk in and instead stood outside with a look of anxiety on her face. Using her divine sense, she found that there was indeed a strange yet familiar life aura inside the palace. Even if the seas ran dry and the rocks crumbled, or the heavens fell, she would not forget this special life aura. This was an aura that was connected to her bloodline, an aura that originated from the same source as her. Yang Kai and Zhu Qing fell behind her and glanced at each other, not knowing what to say. Both of them could feel Fu Xian's emotions at the moment and were unable to control herself. Suddenly, Fu Xian turned her head and looked at Zhu Qing nervously. "Qing, is there anything wrong with my current appearance?" Her expression was as if she was afraid that something was wrong with her appearance and would provoke her daughter's disgust. Zhu Qing shook her head and said, "No." "What about your clothes? Are there any wrinkles in your clothes?" "No." "What about your hair, is it messy?" "Zhu Qing," Yang Kai said, "Third elder, you don't have to worry about personal gains and losses. You are little Chi's mother." This junior heard an unpleasant saying in the early years: a dog doesn't despise a poor family, and a son doesn't despise an ugly mother. No matter what, you are still little Chi's mother. There is no reason for her not to acknowledge you. Besides, I'm afraid there is no better mother in this world than Third Elder. Is that so? Fu Xian took a deep breath. Yang Kai smiled and said, "Although little Chi didn't say much to me along the way, I can feel that little Chi wants to see you very much. She wants to see what the person who gave birth to her looks like, but she is a little afraid." Fu Xian turned her head and asked in a trembling voice, "What is she afraid of?" Yang Kai said, "She doesn't know why you abandoned her back then. She is afraid that when she comes to see you this time, you won't acknowledge her." Fu Xian was startled when she heard this. Her eyes quickly turned red and tears flowed down her cheeks. Before the tears fell to the ground, they turned into crystal clear beads and fell to the ground. If this scene was seen by someone with ulterior motives, they would probably go crazy. Dragon race people shed tears and turn them into beads, which was an extremely rare material for alchemy. Fu Xian murmured, "How can I not acknowledge her? I am the one who has wronged her." Third Elder. Zhu Qing felt sour in her heart. Seeing her cry, she also felt quite uncomfortable. Fu Xian suddenly wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. She chuckled and said, "I made a fool of myself in front of you." Zhu Qing slowly shook her head. How could she laugh at Fu Xian in such a situation? After a little adjustment, Fu Xian didn't find anything unusual. Only then did she step forward and walk into the bedroom. After a while, she entered. Yang Kai and Zhu Qing stood outside and didn't follow in to disturb her, but they were both quietly paying attention to the situation. Using their divine senses, Yang Kai noticed that Fu Xian and Mo Xiaoqi's emotions were fluctuating, especially Mo Xiaoqi. Her mood swings were so intense that it made one worry that something bad would happen to her. Until a certain moment, when this mood swings reached a peak, Mo Xiaoqi's sobbing voice rang out from inside the bedroom, "Mother, it's done." Yang Kai breathed a sigh of relief. Although he didn't think that this mother and daughter pair would cause any kind of disturbance when they met, the whole process was still quite worrying. At this moment, this cry meant that Martial Beast's instructions had been completed, so Yang Kai could finally put down the burden in his heart. Zhu Qing gently snuggled into Yang Kai's arms and whispered, "Will our children be like this in the future?" Zhu Qing couldn't help but worry. Yang Kai grinned, "No, if we really have a child in the future, I will never let him be separated from you. If Dragon Island dares to stop us, we will turn Dragon Island upside down." Zhu Qing smiled sweetly, "Then when you have the ability to turn Dragon Island upside down, we will have a child." Yang Kai looked around and his big hand once again wandered up and down Zhu Qing's body, whispering, I can give you one right now. Zhu Qing grabbed his hand and pinched his waist at the same time. Yang Kai grimaced. I haven't seen you in so many years, aren't you hungry? He secretly urged the golden divine dragon sauce to tease Zhu Qing's heartstrings. Zhu Qing couldn't stand this. The first time they met, Yang Kai had used this method to take advantage of her. The golden divine dragon sauce had an indescribable attraction to her, causing her to become restless. Chapter 33-32. At this moment, after being teased by Yang Kai, her face turned red, but she still gritted her teeth and said, You don't need to care if I'm hungry or not, I know you must be full. Yang Kai glared at her and said, Nonsense, how could that be? Your husband's stomach is rumbling with hunger right now. Zhu Qing looked at him meaningfully and said, I remember you once told me that in the lower star territory, you still have, well, for wives. Why? You didn't see them when you returned to the lower star territory this time? Yang Kai scratched his face and said, Oh, I saw them. Zhu Qing said, Speaking of which, you have been separated from them for many years. You have been lonely for a long time, so don't tell me you didn't do anything. Yang Kai laughed hollowly and said, The weather on Dragon Island is pretty good. Zhu Qing snorted and poked his chest with her hand. You still dare to say you're hungry? Yang Kai grabbed her little hand and played with it, then said with a smile, Let's change the topic. This conversation was quite awkward for him. Su Yang, Xia Ningchang, Shanqing Luo, and Shui Yu didn't mind. They had been together for a long time, so they were used to it. Yang Kai always had a headache about how to get Zhu Qing to meet them. His 4 wives were certainly first-class existences in the lower star territory, but compared to Zhu Qing, they were much worse. After all, who could compare with a dragon lady with such an identity? He was really afraid that Zhu Qing would have some bad ideas. Zhu Qing looked at him angrily, then suddenly pulled out her hand and carefully straightened his clothes for him. She looked at him affectionately and said, Now is not the time, wait, until the 3rd elder and the others leave. Yang Kai nodded repeatedly, Okay. Suddenly, he looked at Zhu Qing affectionately and said softly, Qing you are so kind. These simple words were better than any sweet talk. Zhu Qing was delighted when she heard them. Although she didn't show it on her face, the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. She said, Don't disturb me. I'll take you to meet the 1st elder and the 2nd elder. You have to behave yourself when you meet them. Meet the 1st elder and 2nd elder? Yang Kai's eyes widened. He shook his head and said, It's fine to see the great elder, but what about the 2nd elder? I'm not going. He rejected that woman from the bottom of his heart. It was this woman who banished Fu Xian to the dragon tomb, and it was also this woman who wanted to marry Zhu Qing to Fu Kai. Yang Kai didn't even have a good impression of her. Zhu Qing glared at him. You have to go even if you don't want to. Yang Kai chuckled. Can you force a cow to drink if it doesn't want to? Aren't you afraid that I will fight with that old witch when I see her? Zhu Qing frowned and said, What old witch? Don't speak nonsense. If the 2nd elder heard this, she would be angered to death. Yang Kai straightened his neck and said, If she isn't an old witch, then who is? Qing let me tell you, just because she wanted to marry you to that Fu Kai, I will never like her in this life. It's a good thing that Fu Kai was killed by Wukong, otherwise, I would have killed him too. Zhu Qing sighed and said, I know you have resentment in your heart, but she is the 2nd elder of the dragon race, and I am also a member of the dragon race. You should know that it is difficult for the dragon race to reproduce. Every dragon race has the responsibility to continue the bloodline. Although I hate what she did back then, from the standpoint of the dragon race, there is no problem with what she did. No problem? Yang Kai suddenly raised his voice and looked at Zhu Qing angrily. She wanted to marry you to someone else, and you are actually telling me that there is no problem with what she did. Zhu Qing said, I also said that from the standpoint of the dragon race. Yang Kai gritted his teeth and said, I don't care what you were like in the past, but now you have to remember that you are my woman first, Yang Kai, and then a member of the dragon race. Zhu Qing blinked her big eyes and looked at him blankly. Are you angry with me? Yang Kai was angry for a while, then he waved his hand and said, Why would I be angry with you? I am angry with that old witch. Zhu Qing laughed and stepped forward to hold his arm. Okay, I will remember. In the future, I will think about you first, and then think about the dragon race. Yang Kai lowered his head and glanced at her chest that was slightly deformed by his arm. His heart was hot, and he swallowed his saliva and said, "Why are you pulling and pulling? If you have something to say, let's talk nicely. In broad daylight, this is improper." After saying that, he looked left and right with a sneaky look. Zhu Qing ignored him. Instead, she leaned closer and said with a charming look, "Then you should first agree to come with me to visit the two elders." Yang Kai looked at her and said, "Do you think you can just sell your body? You are so childish. If you say you don't want to go, you won't go even if you beat me to death. Ian, you can visit the great elder alone, but as for that old witch, she can die as far as she can." Zhu Qing said softly, "Actually, after the last incident, the second elder's attitude has changed a lot. Otherwise, why do you think she didn't banish me to the dragon's tomb? That year, even the third elder was banished to the dragon's tomb by her. The third elder and the second elder are like sisters." Yang Kai sneered, "What a good sister." The older sister actually banished the younger sister to the dragon's tomb and left her to fend for herself. If the martial beastmaster didn't come in time, would the third elder still be alive? She should be glad that she made a wise decision, or else she wouldn't have a good ending. He paused for a moment and said, "Ian, she must have felt the pressure. She provoked the martial beast, but if she also provoked me, how could she bear it?" Seeing that he didn't listen to reason, Zhu Qing couldn't help but stomp her feet and said, "What do I have to do to make you willing to go with me to visit the second elder?" Yang Kai turned his head and said, "Don't do anything, I just won't go." Zhu Qing said angrily, "Then do as you like. Anyway, if you miss me in the future, you can come to the Dragon Island to visit me. Let's just live like this. Anyway, you have 4 wives, so you won't be lonely. You even have a dragon race lover on the Dragon Island, so you have a lot of face." After saying that, she turned her head and no longer paid attention to Yang Kai. Hearing her mention the lover, Yang Kai suddenly thought of Ji Yarrow and inexplicably felt a little guilty. He rolled his eyes and secretly glanced at her. Seeing that her eyes were slightly red and she looked like she was about to cry, he couldn't bear it. He walked over to her and straightened her body, then said to her, "Are you angry?" Zhu Qing tilted her head to the side and completely ignored him. Yang Kai couldn't help but scratch his ears and scratch his cheeks. He secretly felt that he had said a little too harshly just now. He said with difficulty, "Qing you know, I really don't like that woman's attitude and behavior. I haven't settled the previous debt with her yet. This is also because I don't have the ability. When I have the ability, I promise I won't forgive her." Zhu Qing said in a low voice, "Then you should know that I am a dragon race, she is the second elder of the dragon race, and I am also your person. If you insist on not easing the relationship with her, I will be sandwiched in the middle." Hearing her say this, Yang Kai couldn't help but be a little dumbfounded. Thinking about it carefully, it was indeed so. He could do as much as he wanted and not give face to Fu Tianyi, but it seemed to make things more difficult for Zhu Qing. Thinking of this, Yang Kai nodded and said, "All right, I will go with you to visit the two elders." Zhu Qing raised her head in surprise. "Really?" Yang Kai reached out and pinched her cheeks, causing her face to distort a little. "For Qing what harm is there in climbing a mountain of swords or plunging into a sea of fire?" Zhu Qing immediately looked at him with a vigilant expression. "Sweet words come out of your mouth as soon as you open it. Tell me honestly, how many women have you seduced outside?" Yang Kai didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Why are you talking about this?" Zhu Qing snorted, "You look serious, but in fact, you have a belly full of tricks. When we first met, I already knew your nature." Yang Kai let out a long sigh. "Qing you have misjudged me. I have been in Star Boundary for several decades, and before I met you, I had always been a virgin, indifferent to all kinds of beautiful women. Only you can make me unable to control myself." Zhu Qing's eyes suddenly became a little blurred. Facts proved that whether it was the human race or the dragon race, as long as it was a woman, she would have no resistance to sweet words. Yang Kai changed the topic, "But you can't blame me for that. I also didn't know that there would be such an accident." Zhu Qing said shyly, How can you blame me? Blame me, blame me. Yang Kai immediately took the blame and laughed. Actually, if it wasn't for that accident, you and I might not have reached this step now. Zhu Qing's face turned slightly red, obviously recalling the scene of their first meeting. But after thinking for a while, her face changed again. Oh right, have you seen Fu Ling? Yes, I have. Yang Kai nodded, not knowing why she suddenly asked this. She said that she was punished to guard the entrance of Dragon Island for 100 years. I came from there, so I naturally met her. She was the one who brought me here. Otherwise, how would I know which spiritual island you are staying on? She brought you here? Zhu Qing turned pale with fright. She looked at Yang Kai nervously and said, she didn't do anything to you, right? Yang Kai couldn't help but laugh. What can she do to me? Zhu Qing thought for a while and said, that's right, you are with little Seven, so she can't do anything to you. Yang Kai looked at her in confusion. What's wrong? Why do you look so vigilant against her? Zhu Qing looked at him helplessly. After hesitating for a while, she decided to tell him the truth. You also know that I only had a level 8 dragon vein, and level 8 dragon vein is already considered a very high existence on Dragon Island. Before me, only the 3rd elder and the 4th elder had level 9 dragon veins. But after being with you, I unexpectedly broke through to level 9. Yang Kai laughed. Qing you don't have to thank me, that's what I should do. Zhu Qing bashfully hit him and went back to the topic. Now, everyone on Dragon Island knows why my bloodline suddenly advanced, so some sisters seem to be interested in you. What do you mean? Yang Kai was stunned. Zhu Qing glared at him and said, don't you know what I mean? Yang Kai's eyes darted around. He really wanted to pretend to be innocent, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't. Pointing to himself, he grinned and said, could it be that all the dragon girls on Dragon Island have ideas about me? Chapter 33-33. Zhu Qing said unhurriedly, we are members of the dragon race. Although we are innately powerful, the advancement of our bloodline has always been a headache for us. It takes a lot of time to advance our bloodline to the next level. Now that there is suddenly a shortcut, and it is a shortcut without any hidden dangers, do you think they won't be tempted? May I ask, how many females are there on Dragon Island? Yang Kai coughed lightly. Zhu Qing said, other than me, the 2nd elder, and the 3rd elder, there are 4 more. Yang Kai rubbed his chin, so few. Although he already knew that the ratio of males to females on Dragon Island was very unbalanced, he didn't expect that there were only 7 females in the dragon race. Zhu Qing was already his, the 2nd elder and the 3rd elder definitely wouldn't have any ideas about him. As for the remaining 4, Zhu Qing looked at Yang Kai from the corner of her eyes. I'm warning you, you definitely can't have any ideas about them. Yang Kai said in all seriousness, how can I have any ideas about them? I'll be thankful if they don't have any ideas about me. If what you said is true, then my existence is a great supplement for them. He thought to himself, no wonder Fu Ling kept acting coquettishly in front of me, so she had this kind of plan. Speaking of which, although Fu Ling's style isn't very good, she still has the looks and figure. Zhu Qing sighed, actually, you can't blame them. The advancement of our bloodline is too attractive to the dragon race. They also don't want to miss this opportunity. Anyway, no matter what, during the time you are on Dragon Island, don't leave my sight. Yes, I know. Yang Kai nodded repeatedly, patted his chest and said, I promise to be with you day and night, I won't leave your side easily. Zhu Qing obviously knew what he meant. She glanced at him and said, let's go and greet the 2 elders first. Since he had promised Zhu Qing, he couldn't back out now. Fortunately, the first person to visit was Great Elder Zhu Yang. Yang Kai didn't think much of this Great Elder. In his impression, this Great Elder of the dragon race didn't seem to have a temper, but his strength was unquestionable. Although Zhu Yang's name had the word Yang in it, it was not a fire dragon, but an azure dragon. On the Greenwood Island where he lived, ancient trees towered into the sky. Each tree was incomparably huge. With a single glance, one could tell that they had been growing for countless years. At the center of the Greenwood Island, there was a tree that was even bigger than the other ancient trees. It stood out from the rest, occupying an area of 1,000 feet in radius. Its scattered canopy almost covered half of the island. When Yang Kai and Zhu Qing arrived, they saw Zhu Yang in a golden rooster's stance. One of his legs was half bent, he was standing under the roots of the tree, his hands were clasped together motionlessly. The great elder's upper body was naked, he was only wearing a pair of loose cloth pants. His deep breaths seemed to be able to roll up the wind and the clouds. His whole body was bulging with muscles, like the roots of an old tree. Every piece of his flesh contained an extremely terrifying power. When he opened his eyes, a great majesty descended from the sky. It actually made Yang Kai's skin hurt. However, in the next instant, the sharp light in Zhu Yang's eyes disappeared, it was replaced by a calm expression. Great Elder. Zhu Qing stepped forward and saluted. Yang Kai also took a few steps forward, he cupped his hands and said, Yang Kai greets the Great Elder. Zhu Yang didn't say anything, instead he closed his eyes again, let out a light breath, and slowly stopped his cultivation. He took out some clothes from his space ring, and while putting them on, he looked at Yang Kai with a smile. You have guts, you actually dare to come to the Dragon Island? Yang Kai turned his head to look at Zhu Qing, and said with a grin, it has nothing to do with guts, since Qing is here, I will naturally come. Zhu Yang nodded his head lightly, you are considerate, you know to come and see this old man as soon as possible. Yang Kai raised his eyebrows and said, Great Elder knows that I came to the Dragon Island. After asking, he suddenly felt that he was a little stupid, since Fu Ling saw him, she must have already passed the news. After all, she shouldered the responsibility of guarding the entrance to the Dragon Island. If she didn't even inform the Dragon Island, it would be a real dereliction of duty. Zhu Yang said, to be honest, this old man doesn't know what kind of attitude I should use to deal with you right now. Yang Kai frowned slightly. What do you mean by that, Great Elder? Zhu Yang clasped his hands behind his back, and said indifferently, you are a human, yet you abducted a dragon race girl. This is something that my dragon race cannot tolerate. Last time you trespassed on the Dragon Island, you openly snatched the bride on the wedding day of my dragon race, causing my dragon race to lose face, and even one of my clansmen died because of you. The one who died was an 8th rank thunder dragon, causing my dragon race to suffer a huge loss. Because of all these, the enmity between you and my dragon race can be said to be irreconcilable. Tell me, should this old man treat you as an enemy? Great Elder. Zhu Qing's expression changed greatly when she heard this. She originally thought that the Great Elder had a mild temper, so she brought Yang Kai to see him first. As long as Yang Kai could pass the Great Elder's test, then the rest of the matter would be easy to handle. But she didn't expect that Zhu Yang would say such words right from the start, so how could Zhu Qing not be shocked? Listening to the Great Elder's words, it seemed that he wanted Yang Kai to pay with his blood. If he really forced the Great Elder to take action, then how could Yang Kai have a good time today? But just as she spoke, Yang Kai cut her off and said with a slight smile, Great Elder, if you want to condemn me, why worry about the pretext? Zhu Yang narrowed his eyes, you want to condemn me? Everything this old man has said is true. How could I want to incriminate you? Yang Kai shook his head and said, if Great Elder wants to use these things to condemn me, then this junior also has something to say. Zhu Yang said indifferently, this old man is all ears. Yang Kai said, Great Elder said that I abducted Zhu Qing. I don't agree with this. Love between a man and a woman is human nature. How can true love be limited by race? What's more, Zhu Qing is still on the Dragon Island, how can you say that I abducted her? Well, if Great Elder said that I abducted Zhu Qing's heart, then I will accept it. Zhu Yang's expression was indifferent, no one could tell if he was happy or angry. He also didn't have any intention to speak. Yang Kai continued, since Zhu Qing is already my woman, then how can she marry someone else? Therefore, although I didn't want to snatch the marriage, I had no choice but to do it. Moreover, I did compromise that day and took out the Dragon Island command in exchange for Zhu Qing's freedom. However, it's a pity that the dragon race doesn't seem to recognize the Dragon Island command. Rumor has it that the Dragon Island command will fulfill any request of the owner of the Dragon Island command as long as the owner can fulfill it. That's a complete lie. Zhu Yang was speechless. The Dragon Island command was indeed the fault of the Dragon Island command. Yang Kai continued, as for Fu Kai's death, that was done by Wukong. What does it have to do with me? If the dragon race wants to take revenge, then just look for Wukong. Don't tell me that the dragon race only bullies the weak and fears the strong. Since they can't win against Wukong, they can only bully me. Zhu Yang muttered to himself for a while, then raised his head and said, let's just talk about the matter. Why are you criticizing the dragon race? Yang Kai said arrogantly, I'm just arguing a little to prove my innocence. Zhu Yang snorted, you have a sharp tongue. Yang Kai grinned and said, that's also a skill. Zhu Yang couldn't help but laugh, although what you said makes sense, the dragon race suffered a huge loss because of you. Not to mention Fu Kai's death, you should be the one who stole the dragon blood flower, right? Yang Kai said seriously, what dragon blood flower? I have never seen it before. Zhu Yang said angrily, don't try to play dumb in front of this old man. It's fine if you took those mid-grade and high-grade dragon blood flowers, but why did you take those low-grade dragon blood flowers as well? Are those useful to you? Now that there aren't many dragon blood flowers left on Dragon Island, at least for the next 1,000 years, the bloodline of our dragon race can forget about improving. How do you want to settle this score? Yang Kai's face twitched. He was indeed in the wrong. Stealing the marriage in front of everyone and injuring Fu Kai was still reasonable, but stealing the dragon blood flower was completely his fault. It was just that he wanted to improve his dragon bloodline that day and was forced to do so. Now that he wanted to ease his relationship with the dragon race, this matter was somewhat unsolvable. But now that things had come to this, what else could Yang Kai do? He could only straighten his neck and say, what does the Great Elder want? Please make it clear. For Chinga, I'll admit it. Zhu Yang snorted, don't say it so righteously. Since you did something wrong, you should naturally make up for it. Yang Kai looked at him from the corner of his eyes, let's make things clear first. If the Great Elder insists on making things difficult for me, don't blame me for not giving you face. Zhu Yang was annoyed and amused at the same time. Do I need a brat like you to give me face? Face is something that is earned by oneself, not given by others. Yang Kai nodded, the Great Elder is right. Zhu Yang said, you stole the dragon blood flower, causing my people's bloodline to be unable to improve for the next 1,000 years. But if you can solve this problem, the grudge between you and the dragon race can be set aside for the time being. He did not say that it was written off. After all, Yang Kai was more or less responsible for Fu Kai's death. How does the Great Elder want me to solve this? Compensate the dragon race for the dragon blood flowers? Although I still have some, they are all low-grade ones, and they are the ones that were not used up last time. I have already used up all the mid and high-grade ones. Hearing this, Zhu Yang's eyes twitched. Used up all the mid and high-grade ones? Even if you eat them like rice, you can't eat so many, right? Zhu Yang was originally hoping that Yang Kai still had some dragon blood flowers left, but now that he heard this, his heart turned cold. Even if the dragon race consumed the dragon blood flower, it would take some time to refine its medicinal effects, but Yang Kai said that he had used it up. In other words, he had used up all the mid and high-grade dragon blood flowers in a very short time. Even if he still had some low-grade dragon blood flowers, what use would they be? Yang Kai sniffed and said, yes, bastard. Zhu Yang flew into a rage. This time, he was really angry. He almost couldn't hold back and beat Yang Kai up. Zhu Qing was so scared that she quickly stood in front of Yang Kai. Fortunately, Zhu Yang was angry, but he did not lose his mind. After being angry for a while, he thought of something and suddenly calmed down. He looked at Yang Kai and said thoughtfully, I heard that you have the ability to quickly improve the bloodline of the dragon race. Zhu Qing's eyes flashed coldly when she heard this, but Yang Kai was dumbfounded. Chapter 33-34. Before coming to Qingmu Island, Yang Kai and Zhu Qing had just talked about this topic. Zhu Qing also specifically told him not to leave her sight, so as not to give the dragon race sisters an opportunity to take advantage of him. Yang Kai also patted his chest and promised that he would never be seduced by beauty. Who would have thought that the Great Elder would suddenly mention this at this moment? If it weren't for the previous conversation, Yang Kai might not have been able to connect the dots. But with the previous conversation with Zhu Qing, The meaning of the Great Elder's words at this moment was very thought-provoking. Yang Kai said dumbfoundedly, "Great Elder, you can't be thinking of..." Zhu Yang chuckled as he looked Yang Kai up and down with his seemingly turbid but actually sparkling eyes, as if he was looking at a peerless piece of jade, causing goosebumps to rise all over Yang Kai's body. Gently nodding his head, he said, "You're lucky, little brat." Really, Yang Kai was suddenly speechless. At this moment, he really wanted to pry open this old guy's head and see what he was thinking. It was fine that Fu Ling was coquettishly seducing him in front of him, but why did the dragon race's Great Elder also have the idea of facilitating such a good thing? Zhu Yang turned to look at Zhu Qing and said with a serious expression, "Qing, I'm afraid this matter will make you feel wronged, but for the sake of our dragon race, we have to do this. I believe you should understand." Zhu Qing lowered her eyes and said, "Qing understands, but Great Elder doesn't need to tell me this. It's all up to him." Zhu Yang said, "Good girl, as long as you don't have any objections, what objections can he have?" "Men, humph." He snorted coldly, as if he wasn't a man. Yang Kai immediately said, "I have an objection." Zhu Yang looked at him with great interest. "You have an objection? What objection can you have?" Yang Kai wiped his face. "I have a big objection." Zhu Yang smiled and said, "If you have something to say, just say it." Yang Kai solemnly said, "It's true that I'm a man. It's true that I covet beauty, but it's not like I don't have a bottom line. Not to mention that I'm not familiar with the women of the dragon race. Even if I am, this kind of thing requires mutual consent. When the conditions are right, success will come naturally. I've gone through thick and thin with Qing, and we've gone through thick and thin together to get to where we are today. How can I do the same with the other dragon women? Senior, what do you take me for? A breeding pig? So, you're not willing?" Zhu Yang looked at him in surprise. Yang Kai sneered, "If it were you, would you be willing?" Zhu Yang thought about it seriously. It's hard to refuse. Even a man would find it hard to refuse such a temptation. After all, there were several dragon ladies. Besides, the dragon race can't tolerate what happened between me and Qing. If something happens between me and the other dragon ladies, how can the dragon race tolerate it? Zhu Yang immediately said, "If you can improve their bloodline quickly, not to mention Qing, even if all of them are married to you, what's the harm?" Hearing this, Yang Kai was dumbfounded. This old man is so bold, and just thinking about this scene makes my blood boil. However, if he really did that, then the male dragon race on Dragon Island would see Yang Kai as a thorn in their side. Even his brother-in-law wouldn't be spared from this. The ratio of men to women in the dragon race was already unbalanced. If all the dragon ladies on Dragon Island were to be taken by Yang Kai, then the remaining male dragon race wouldn't be able to endure it. "Senior, please don't mention this matter again. I absolutely won't agree to it." Yang Kai waved his hand and refused righteously. He took a peek at Zhu Qing's expression while he was at it. Seeing that she was bursting with joy, his heart immediately calmed down. Don't be in a hurry to refuse. Go back and think about it carefully. This matter won't do you any harm. Zhu Yang waved his hand and said. Yang Kai didn't want to get entangled in this matter. He cupped his hands and said, I came to Dragon Island this time because I still have a few things that I need the Great Elder's help with. Zhu Yang laughed and said, the grudge between you and Dragon Island is still not settled yet, and you still want to ask this old man to help you with something? Is there something wrong with your head, or is there something wrong with my head? Yang Kai said, regardless of whether the Great Elder admits it or not, it's a fact that I possess the dragon race's origin. Zhu Yang thought in his heart, if not for that, how could you even have the right to speak? I would have already killed you with a slap. Furthermore, you possess the ancestral dragon's origin. This matter is really big. If that's the case, then that kid can barely be considered as half a dragon race. Yang Kai continued, since he is half a dragon race, it's not too much to ask the Great Elder to help me with a few things, right? That depends on what kind of things you are talking about. Zhu Yang snorted lightly. Yang Kai said solemnly, for the dragon race, these things aren't that big of a deal. The first thing is that I hope Qing can accompany me and leave Dragon Island together with me. She won't have to suffer the pain of house arrest anymore. Zhu Yang said, what else? This kid wants to take a look at the Dragon Palace Hall. Yang Kai pondered for a moment and said, last time I came in a hurry and left in a hurry. Although I attracted a lot of dragon souls, I didn't have time to comprehend anything. This time, this kid wants to enter the Dragon Palace Hall to learn the dragon race's secret art. Zhu Yang was silent for a moment, then asked, just these two things? That's right. This old man has no objections. Yang Kai was startled, then he was overjoyed. Many thanks for the great elder's help. Zhu Yang chuckled, this old man has no objections, but I don't know what the second elder thinks. If you can convince the second elder, then everything can be discussed. The corner of Yang Kai's mouth twitched. You are the great elder, shouldn't you be the leader on Dragon Island? Zhu Yang blinked and said, of course, I am the one in charge when it comes to external matters. However, the second elder is the one in charge when it comes to internal matters. Alright, go look for the second elder if you wish to fulfill your wish. After he finished speaking, he turned around and walked toward the treehouse. Yang Kai stared at his back, gritted his teeth and muttered. Zhu Yang's figure paused, he turned his head and said with a twitching expression, Kid, what did you just say? Say it again if you have the guts. Zhu Qing hurriedly said, he didn't say anything, the great elder might have misheard. We will take our leave first. While speaking, she pulled Yang Kai and flew out. Yang Kai turned around and shouted, the great elder of the dragon race is actually afraid of his wife. His voice was like a dragon's roar, shaking the leaves until they rustled down. Kid, get back here. Zhu Yang was flustered and exasperated, he rolled up his sleeves and wanted to chase after them. But where were Yang Kai and Zhu Qing? After chattering for a while, he put his hands behind his back and said, what a joke. This old man is afraid of her. Her eyes are on her ass. This old man won't lower himself to her level. After he finished speaking, he quickly looked around to make sure there was no one around, then he valiantly returned to his treehouse, like a big rooster that had won a battle. High up in the sky, Zhu Qing twisted Yang Kai's ear and said angrily, why did you provoke the great elder? The great elder is very good. Yang Kai smiled apologetically, don't twist my ear, it's going to fall off. I just said it casually. He reached out and grabbed her soft hair and took it from his ear. Zhu Qing said angrily, besides, is it shameful to be afraid of your wife? Yang Kai laughed and said, in fact, there is no man who is afraid of his wife. How can a man be afraid of his wife? Is that so? Zhu Qing looked at him from the corner of her eyes. The so-called fear is nothing more than an expression of forbearance and love. At this time, Kai Yang naturally knew what to say to make her happy. Zhu Qing's expression changed. Looking at his slightly red ear, the cold expression on her face instantly melted, and her heart was filled with sweetness. However, not long after, her mood became heavy again. She reminded him, you barely passed the great elder, but when you meet the second elder later, you must not lose your temper. As long as you pass the second elder, it will be much more convenient for you to come to Dragon Island in the future. Maybe I can go out and see you in the future. I know. No matter what bad things she says later, I will just treat it as her fart. Zhu Qing didn't know whether to laugh or cry, you can't let her hear this. Ice Snow Island was Fu Tin's spiritual island. Fu Tin was an ice dragon, and the spiritual island he lived in was naturally icy cold. Looking at the entire spiritual island from afar, it was like a huge ice mountain. Birds couldn't fly for 1,000 miles, and people couldn't find any traces. Before they even got close, they could already feel the overwhelming coldness. Even the surrounding sea territory was frozen into ice. There seemed to be no life within a few thousand miles. Although this kind of severe cold was bitterly cold, it didn't affect Yang Kai and Zhu Qing too much. The two of them landed at the center of the island. From afar, they could see a huge ice platform made of 10,000-year-old ice. Fu Tin was sitting on the ice platform. He was dressed in white and looked pure and flawless. He almost blended in perfectly with the surrounding scenery. Descending from the sky, they landed at a place 300 feet away from Fu Tin. Zhu Qing bowed and said, Qing'er brings her husband, Yang Kai, to pay our respects to second elder. This sudden call of husband caused Yang Kai to be a little distracted. until Zhu Qing used her arm to touch him gently. He cupped his hands and said, Yang Kai pays his respects to second elder. Fu Tin opened her eyes. Her beautiful eyes were filled with coldness. That biting coldness seemed to be able to freeze one's mind. In her eyes, there was no Yang Kai at all. She only looked at Zhu Qing and said, Who allowed you to leave the island without permission? Scram back. When she said that, the veins on Yang Kai's forehead popped out. His anger surged up. What did she mean? Qing came to pay her respects out of goodwill. Her nose wasn't nose and her eyes weren't eyes. She actually asked Qing to scram back? Seeing his displeased expression, Zhu Qing hurriedly said, Qing and my husband came here to ask second elder for a favor. Husband? Fu Tin sneered, You are not married, how can you have a husband? Even if you have one, it should be the dead Fu Kai and not some random guy. Zhu Qing said, Qing husband is right beside you. Why does second elder have to turn a blind eye? Fu Tin closed her eyes and said, I don't see any husband. Even if there is, I will not admit it. Zhu Qing sighed and said, Whether second elder admits it or not, it is a fact that my husband and I are husband and wife. Qing will not marry anyone else in this life. In that case, it's useless to say more. Scram back. When you think it through, then come and see me again. Qing, that old witch. Yang Kai shouted angrily. Although he had repeatedly warned himself to be patient before coming here and was mentally prepared for Fu Tin's attitude, when he heard her telling Zhu Qing to scram back, he still couldn't hold it in. Chapter 33-35. The anger in his chest erupted like a volcano. Yang Kai took a step forward and pointed at Fu Ti as he scolded, Don't think that you can do whatever you want just because you are the second elder of the dragon race. Although Qing is from the dragon race, she also has her own freedom. It's not up to you to interfere. As long as I'm her husband, I'll be her husband for life. It's not up to you to deny it. I came to visit you today because I'm giving you face. But since you don't want this face, then it's fine. Anyway, we don't need you to acknowledge anything. As soon as he said that, Zhu Qing knew that she was in trouble. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart. Sure enough, as soon as Fu Ti's aura moved, the already cold world became even colder. She narrowed her eyes and said, Kid, what did you call me? Old witch, old witch, old witch, old witch, old witch. Yang Kai opened his mouth and looked at her provocatively. Are you satisfied? If not, I can call you a few more times. Fu Ti slowly got up and said coldly, After today, if you are still alive, I think you should remember the saying that trouble comes from the mouth. Yang Kai grinned hideously, You want to fight? Come on, let's see who will die first. As soon as he said that, a dragon roar exploded. The phantom of the golden divine dragon behind him pounced into Yang Kai's body. The dragon's aura instantly spread out. At the same time, a buzzing sound came from the distant dragon palace. The world was instantly filled with dragon roars. The entire dragon island seemed to be shaking. No matter where the dragons were, they all turned their heads to look in the direction of the dragon palace. Their faces were filled with surprise. Yang Kai was also a little surprised. He didn't expect that he could also trigger the resonance of the dragon palace by activating the origin power of the golden divine dragon here. This time, he was even more fearless. He laughed and said, It seems that the ancestors of the dragon race are all on my side. Even so, he was like a cheetah that was ready to pounce on its prey at any moment. His entire body was tense, and he could explode with a thunderous attack as long as there was even the slightest provocation. After all, his opponent was the second elder of the dragon race, an existence that could exchange blows with the great emperors. How could he dare to be careless? Contrary to Yang Kai's expectations, Fu Sui actually didn't make a move right away, and Fu Sui instead looked coldly at Yang Kai while killing intent coiled in his eyes and almost condensed into material form. Zhu Qing stepped between the two and said anxiously, Second elder, please calm down. My husband didn't mean to do this. Please don't take offense. She turned her head and glared at Yang Kai. Her eyes were full of blame. Her meaning was obvious. She had clearly said that she would be patient. Why did she tear off all pretense of cordiality as soon as they met? Yang Kai looked embarrassed. Sensing Zhu Qing's embarrassment, he couldn't help but sniffle. Even his imposing manner was reduced by a notch. Don't tell me you didn't mean to. Fu Sui looked at Zhu Qing indifferently. If I insist on killing him today, what are you going to do? Zhu Qing was startled and said bitterly, as a dragon race, I naturally have to abide by the rules of the dragon race. However, if my husband is in trouble, Qing'er can't just sit by and watch. If second elder insists on doing this, then Qing'er can only live and die with my husband. Yang Kai looked at her emotionally. He tugged at her sleeve and said, Qing'er, move aside. This old witch is probably delusional if she wants to kill me. Vile spawn. Fu Sui's expression turned gloomy. He never expected Zhu Qing to actually give such an answer. He took a deep breath and said, It seems like Dragon Island can't hold your heart anymore. What kind of dragon race are you? Zhu Qing said sadly, Please forgive me, second elder. Yang Kai said, You also said that Dragon Island can't hold Qing'er's heart. Why don't second elder release Qing'er's freedom and let her leave with me? This can be considered fulfilling someone else's wish. We, husband and wife, will definitely set up a longevity tablet for you in the future. We will burn a stick of incense in the morning and night and kowtow 3 times in the morning and evening. We will bless second elder to live as long as the heavens and stay young forever. Fu Sui snorted coldly, Don't be so glib in front of me. Even if I can't hold her heart, I will keep her body. She was born as a dragon race member and will die as a dragon race ghost. It's not your turn to take advantage of her. Yang Kai frowned, A forcibly picked melon won't be sweet. Fu Sui sneered, So what? Yang Kai looked at her indifferently, Is there really no room for negotiation? Fu Sui's decisiveness made him lose the patience to talk to him. Zhu Qing's obstruction made the two unable to really fight. Yang Kai had nowhere to vent the anger in his heart. You want room for negotiation? Fu Sui snorted coldly. There is. Zhu Qing's eyes lit up. Please enlighten me, second elder. Fu Sui said, As long as this person can make up for the losses he caused to my Dragon Island, I can naturally let bygones be bygones. I can even fulfill your wish and let you two live together. The last sentence made Zhu Qing overjoyed. Second elder was actually willing to fulfill their wish. This was simply unimaginable. However, the previous condition made Zhu Qing somewhat at a loss. Dragon Island's losses? I wonder, what is second elder referring to? Fu Sui sneered, Don't tell me he doesn't know what kind of losses he brought to Dragon Island. Why do you need to ask me? Yang Kai said angrily, Even if there are any losses, it's your own fault. Not to mention that I don't have the ability to make up for it. Even if I really have the ability, I won't make up for it. Fu Sui's eyelids twitched. Who are you calling yourself as I am in front of? Yang Kai hooted, I like it, what can you do? Die, brat. Fu Sui flew into a rage. The killing intent that she suppressed with great difficulty erupted once again. This time, even if Zhu Qing was stopping her, she was going to make a move for real. Zhu Qing hurriedly grabbed Yang Kai's clothes and flew out in a flash. She turned around and said, Second elder, please calm down. Sorry for disturbing you today. She ran very quickly. Naturally, she knew that if she didn't leave now, they would really start fighting. Fu Sui stood in place with a face full of anger. It was obvious that she was quite angry, but she didn't have the intention to chase after them. She only stared hatefully in the direction where the two disappeared. After a short while, a figure flashed. Great Elder Zhu Yang suddenly appeared beside Fu Sui and said, They left? Fu Sui took a deep breath and calmed the rolling qi and blood in his heart. He closed his eyes slightly and said, I really want to kill him. Zhu Yang said with a smile, What can you do even if you kill him? What's more, that's the ancestral dragon's origin. It's not like you didn't feel the abnormality of the Dragon Hall just now. With the protection of so many dragon souls in the Dragon Hall, even if you and I join hands, we might not be able to kill him on the Dragon Island. If we want to kill him, we can only do it outside the Dragon Island. Fu Sui snorted, If it's not so, how can he still be alive? Zhu Yang looked at her in astonishment, You can't really be thinking of killing him, right? Fu Sui gritted her teeth and said, so what if I do? Zhu Yang's head was dripping with cold sweat. Just thinking about it is enough. You can't really make a move. The future of our dragon race depends on him. You have always treated the revival of the dragon race as your responsibility. Back then, you endured the pain of banishing Fu Xian into the dragon tomb. Wasn't it also because of this reason? A little impatience spoils great plans. Fu Sui nodded and said, I understand the reason. But she couldn't hold back her anger when facing that brat. It was hard for her to not have killing intent when he kept calling her old witch. She paused for a moment and said, I have already told him the conditions. Whether he can do it or not will depend on his own ability. Zhu Yang grinned, it's good that you have said it. I think with how much he values Qing he will definitely do his best to do it. Fu Sui suddenly turned her head to look at him, if he can't do it, I will strip the ancestral dragon's origin from his body. With this brat's conduct, he doesn't deserve to have the ancestral dragon's origin. Zhu Yang's expression twitched and he said non-committally, we will see when the time comes. He raised his head to look at the void and let out a long sigh. The ancestral dragon's origin has already appeared. Where is the ancestral phoenix's origin? In the void, Yang Kai and Zhu Qing sped past. Along the way, Zhu Qing didn't say a word. Her beautiful face was so gloomy that a layer of frost could be scraped off. Yang Kai whistled as if nothing had happened, but in fact, he had been carefully observing her expression. Seeing her like that, he knew that he was in trouble. He must have disappointed her with his performance just now. But speaking of which, he only took half of the responsibility at most. The other half was completely because of that lowly servant Fu Zhen. Qing, why don't I elope with you? Why do you care so much about her? Can that old witch really keep an eye on you and me? The outside world is so big, where is she going to find you? Yang Kai suggested. Zhu Qing sighed, of course I can leave with you, but if I really do so, I'm afraid I won't be able to feel at ease for the rest of my life. Eloping was indeed a good thing, but without the approval of the elders, it was destined to be incomplete. Stopping, Zhu Qing stared at Yang Kai affectionately and said, fortunately, Great Elder and Second Elder have no intention of forbidding you from coming to Dragon Island again. If you miss me in the future, come to Dragon Island more often to see me. I will also wait for you here. Yang Kai opened his mouth, but swallowed the persuasion that was at the tip of his tongue. Zhu Qing was not a child. Since she had such considerations, even if he really took her out of Dragon Island, she would not be able to eat or sleep in peace in the future. It was better to let her stay on Dragon Island. At least she wouldn't have to suffer. Smiling freely, he said, then I will accompany you on Dragon Island this time. Reaching out, he held Zhu Qing's soft hand and flew side by side with her to Half Moon Island. They didn't speak a word along the way. When they returned to Half Moon Island, it was already dark. Fu Xian and Mo Xiaoqi didn't leave. The mother and daughter sat together and talked. It was obvious that they were getting along very well. Fu Xian's face was full of love, while Mo Xiaoqi's face was also full of happiness. When she saw Yang Kai and Zhu Qing appear together, Mo Xiaoqi's expression couldn't help but become gloomy. But soon, she smiled and greeted, Big Brother Yang, Big Sister Qing. Fu Xian smiled and said, Xiaoqi insisted on waiting for you to come back and say goodbye to you before she was willing to return to the island with me. Saying so, she patted Mo Xiaoqi's head gently. Now it's time to go back and rest, right? Mo Xiaoqi nodded and looked at Yang Kai. Then I will go with mother first. Big Brother Yang, remember to let me know when you are leaving. Don't worry. Yang Kai smiled and nodded. I will definitely let you know when the time comes. Goodbye, Big Brother Yang and Big Sister Qing. Mo Xiaoqi waved her hand gently and flew out of Half Moon Island together with Fu Xian. After the mother and daughter left, Yang Kai suddenly flashed to Zhu Qing's side and carried her in his arms. Zhu Qing cried out in surprise and instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck. Looking at each other, how could she not know what he wanted to do? Her cheeks immediately blushed and she pouted her lips in the direction of the bedroom. Yang Kai laughed and strode to the bedroom. He kicked open the door and threw Zhu Qing on the bed, pouncing on her. It was a night of spring breeze. The man was making waves while the woman was pleasuring him. Chapter 33-36. Young Kai had a very comfortable few days. With the blue sea and blue sky, accompanied by beauties, he was so happy that he almost forgot about home. During the day, he would go sightseeing with Zhu Qing, enjoying the scenery of the Dragon Island. At night, he would naturally travel with the clouds and the rain. Zhu Qing also knew that these kind of days would not last long. That's why, if nothing unexpected happened, she would be inseparable from Young Kai. But these kind of days were destined not to last long. After more than 10 days, this kind of leisure was finally broken. At the edge of the Crescent Moon Island, Young Kai was lying on the beach with his head resting on his hands. He raised his head and looked at the clouds. Beside him, Cheongchi was lying on the ground. He narrowed his eyes and enjoyed this carefree life. One man and one horse seemed to have become an eternal painting. The tide rose and fell, and the water splashed everywhere on the beach. Old Cheong, this young master has decided, I want to go to the Dragon Palace. Young Kai suddenly said. Cheongchi was taking a nap with his eyes half closed. When he heard this, he suddenly opened his eyes and stood up. He looked at Young Kai, as if he wanted to confirm if he heard wrong. I probably can't take Ching with me, but I definitely have to go to the Dragon Palace. The dragon race's secret technique is very powerful. Since I'm already here, how can I miss it so easily? What do you think of this idea? Cheongchi only shook his head like a rattledrum. Not good, not good. Oh, why not? Young Kai turned his head and looked at him. Cheongchi said, this is the Dragon Island. The Dragon Palace is the most sacred and secretive place of the dragon race. You are not allowed to enter without permission. I'm afraid you won't be able to come back alive. Young Kai sneered and said, it's not like I haven't been to the Dragon Palace before. Didn't Wukong also barge in without permission last time? He is still free and unfettered in his ancestral territory until now. Wukong is Wukong, you are you. Cheongchi still had a disapproving expression. He muttered to himself for a while and said, if you insist on going, that's fine. Wait until this old man leaves the Dragon Island first. Young Kai looked at him with squinted eyes. Old Cheong, you are quite loyal. Cheongchi said, this old man just want to preserve my life and wait until there is an opportunity to avenge young master. Heh. Kai Yang sneered, not bad, it's really hard for you. Cheongchi pretended not to understand and said, anyway, this old man advises you to give up on this idea. If possible, it's best to ask the Dragon Clan to allow you to enter the Dragon Palace. Young Kai shouted angrily, if the dragon race had agreed, this young master wouldn't have needed to barge in. That cheap slut Fu Zhen clearly wanted to take advantage of my weakness to threaten me with Ching. How hateful. Sooner or later, I'll let her know my prowess. Someone is coming. Cheongchi's expression changed as he looked in a certain direction. Young Kai also noticed and looked in that direction. He immediately grinned. A red light was heading straight for Zhu Qing's palace, but after sensing Young Kai's divine sense, it turned in the air and flew over. In an instant, a figure stood in the air and looked down from above. Young Kai lay motionless and raised his hand to greet, hello, brother-in-law. Zhu Lai frowned at his sloppy appearance, thinking that his sister was really blind. How did she fall for such a man? He said lightly, what are you doing lying here? Sunbathing, what else can I do? Young Kai answered matter-of-factly. He waved his hand and said, come down if you have something to say. Why are you standing so high up? The corner of Zhu Lai's mouth twitched, but he still flew down obediently. When he landed beside Young Kai, he turned his head to look at Cheongchi and said in astonishment, you actually took in Cheongchi as your mount? Young Kai didn't stay on Dragon Island for long, but it wasn't short either. There were only a few dragon race on the island. Once there was a little commotion, it would naturally spread quickly. Now, all the dragon race on Dragon Island knew that he was driven out of Ice Snow Island by the second elder. He was even almost killed after infuriating the second elder. Moreover, he had Cheongchi as his mount. Zhu Lai had been practicing the secret technique for the past few days. When he heard the news, he hurried over to take a look. He looked at Cheongchi in astonishment and said, "You are also a member of the sacred spirits. Don't you feel ashamed to be so lowly?" Cheongchi blinked his eyes. Before he could say anything, Yang Kai stood up and stared at Zhu Lai. "Brother-in-law, what do you mean? What enmity do you have with me? Why do you want to turn my mount against me?" Zhu Lai frowned and said, "That's not what I mean. I just feel that. Sigh, forget it. Everyone has their own ambitions." He shook his head and looked as if he expected better from Cheongchi. It was as if Cheongchi was willing to be Yang Kai's mount and embarrass all the sacred spirits. He turned his head to look at Yang Kai and said, "Why aren't you accompanying Zhu Qing? What are you doing here alone?" Yang Kai coldly snorted and said, "Zhu Qing is entertaining the 3 dragon girls. How would I dare to go over? There were only 7 dragon girls on Dragon Island. Excluding Zhu Qing, Fu Tin, and Fu Xian, there were 4 left. However, Fu Ling was still guarding the entrance of Dragon Island and couldn't leave without permission. Therefore, there were only 3 dragon girls left. One of them was of the dragon race, and the other 2 were of the dragon race. In the past few days, these 3 dragon girls were very diligent in coming to Zhu Qing's place. They came almost as soon as the sun rose, and only left when the sky was dark. Their intention was self-evident. Yang Kai only saw them once on the first day. After that, he was immediately sent away by Zhu Qing with an excuse. Speaking of which, the 3 dragon girls didn't give Yang Kai a bad impression. They didn't have any obvious seductive actions like Fu Ling. Even when they looked at Yang Kai, they were a little embarrassed and shy. When facing Zhu Qing, they were full of guilt and uneasiness. Yang Kai suspected that it was the Great Elder who asked the 3 of them to come over. If not, even if he was really of great use to them, with the pride of the dragon race, they wouldn't act like this. The main reason why Fu Ling acted like this was because she had interacted with Yang Kai before. They weren't strangers to each other. Hearing his explanation, Zhu Lai naturally understood. The corner of his eyes couldn't help but twitch. He looked at Yang Kai with a bitter and vengeful gaze. Even his own brother-in-law was like this, not to mention the other male dragon race. At this moment, they probably wanted to peel off Yang Kai's skin and eat Yang Kai's flesh. If they didn't know that Yang Kai's golden divine dragon's origin power suppressed them too much and they weren't his match at all, they would have already come over to fight him to the death. After a moment of silence, Zhu Lai said, "I heard that the second elder gave you a condition?" Yang Kai asked curiously, "You know about this too?" Zhu Lai said, "The Dragon Island is only so big, and there are only so many people in the dragon race. If something happens, it will spread very quickly. Didn't the second elder ask you to compensate for the losses you caused to the dragon race last time?" Yang Kai nodded. "There is such a thing." Zhu Lai said, "Then why don't you think of a way? It's rare for the second elder to agree. If you can fulfill her request, you can naturally bring Zhu Qing away from the Dragon Island. Don't tell me you want to be separated from Zhu Qing in the future." Yang Kai sneered, "Why should I compensate for the losses of the Dragon Island? It's not my fault." Zhu Lai spat out 3 words one by one, "Dragonblood flower." Yang Kai's face twitched. "Did the Great Elder ask you to come?" He was just saying it casually, but Zhu Lai's expression flickered. "You don't have to care who asked me to come. Anyway, in my opinion, you have the ability to fulfill the second elder's condition." "You think I have the ability?" Yang Kai laughed. "Do you know how many dragon blood flowers I collected back then? 2 of the highest grade, 30 of the highest grade, 200 of the middle grade, and none of the lower grade. Almost 1,000 of them. You know quite a lot." Yang Kai was a little surprised. These numbers were not much different from what he calculated previously. He nodded and said, "Then do you know how many dragon blood flowers I have left?" Zhu Lai shook his head. Yang Kai said, the highest grade, and the middle grade are all gone. Only the lower grade are left. Even if I really return the remaining dragon blood flowers, where do I get the rest? I can't conjure dragon blood flowers, right?" Zhu Lai said, "Neither too fast nor too slow. The cultivation of dragon blood flowers is mainly based on dragon's blood. The purer the dragon's blood, the higher the quality of the dragon blood flowers. The dragon blood flowers on the dragon island were basically watered with dragon's blood as the raw material. Not only is the quality not good, but it also takes a long time to grow. But if you really have the heart, you can use your own blood to cultivate dragon blood flowers. Your bloodline may have a miraculous effect on dragon blood flowers. Yang Kai sneered after hearing this. He instinctively wanted to refute, but after thinking carefully, it seemed very reasonable. He rubbed his chin and pondered for a long time. Do you really think I can cultivate those middle and high-grade dragon blood flowers? Zhu Lai said, how would you know if you don't try? The second elder has already said that if you can really fulfill her request and bring Zhu Qing into the dragon palace, she will have nothing to say. As soon as these words came out, an image immediately appeared in Yang Kai's mind. He had openly walked into the dragon temple while Fu Zhan, that cheap maid, had a helpless look on her face. He couldn't help but feel great. She will keep her word. Zhu Lai sighed. The second elder has always kept her word. Yang Kai was very moved. He paced back and forth on the beach. His expression kept changing. He hesitated and found it hard to make a decision. After a while, he clapped his hands and said, all right, I will do it. I don't believe that I can't cultivate dragon blood flowers. Zhu Lai said, then I wish you success. Yang Kai grinned, all right, go back and tell the great elder that I will compensate for the loss of dragon blood flowers. Tell him to relax, who asked me to be the son-in-law of the dragon island. The corner of Zhu Lai's mouth twitched. I just said it casually, it has nothing to do with the great elder. Yang Kai looked at him from the corner of his eyes. You came here to tell me this, isn't it because the great elder ordered you behind the scenes? Zhu Lai still wanted to explain, but in the end, he nodded his head and said, all right. The dragon blood flowers were all stolen by Yang Kai. Within 1,000 years, the bloodline of the dragon race on the dragon island wouldn't be able to improve with the help of the dragon blood flowers. There were only two ways to solve this problem. First, Yang Kai could cultivate enough dragon blood flowers. Second, Yang Kai could help those few dragonesses quickly improve their bloodline. In the end, Zhu Lai still hoped that Yang Kai would make the first choice. That was why he accepted the mission assigned by the great elder to persuade Yang Kai. Chapter 33-37. The matter of cultivating the dragon blood flower was carried out immediately. Yang Kai went back and told Zhu Qing about it. While Zhu Qing was happy, she was also worried. She was happy because if Yang Kai could really fulfill the second elder's request, the dragon island would no longer have a reason to make things difficult for him. If he wanted to enter the dragon palace, the second elder would no longer be in a position to stop him. She was worried about whether Yang Kai's body could handle it. Since he wanted to cultivate the dragon blood flower, he would naturally need a large amount of blood. Even though Yang Kai's cultivation was not low, the amount of blood needed for the dragon blood flower to grow was not small. After some persuasion, Yang Kai mustered up all his energy and insisted on making up for the loss of the dragon blood flower. Since there was no result, Zhu Qing could only let it be. That night, she tried her best to flatter Yang Kai and completely put down her pride as a dragon lady. She served Yang Kai until he felt comfortable all over. The next day, Yang Kai flew alone to the spiritual island where he was cultivating the dragon blood flower. Zhu Qing wanted to follow him, but she was stopped by Yang Kai. After all, when he was cultivating the dragon blood flower, he would need to constantly bleed himself. Zhu Qing would be watching at the side and would be heartbroken. Yang Kai would naturally not bring her along. It would be bad if he couldn't bear to do it when the time came. Yang Kai was not unfamiliar with the location of the spiritual island. After all, he went there under Fu Ling's lead previously. Fu Ling was punished for making a mistake. The one guarding the spiritual island now was the rank 6 green dragon, Fu Qi. Previously, he was the one who went to the half-dragon city and brought hundreds of dragon descendants back to the dragon island. At that time, Fu Qi was insufferably arrogant and majestic. Today, he was waiting at the side of the island. When he saw Yang Kai flying over, he quickly flew up and greeted him. He squeezed out a smile and said, "Brother Yang." Yang Kai sized him up and smiled faintly. "Brother Fu Qi, why are you here?" Fu Qi said, under the orders of the elders, I am guarding the Dragon Blood Island and waiting for Brother Yang's arrival. He paused for a while and said, I heard that Brother Yang decided to cultivate the Dragon Blood Flower here? You want to recreate the scale of the Dragon Blood Island? Yang Kai gritted his teeth, that's true. Suddenly, he felt a little regretful. Brother Yang is righteous. I thank Brother Yang on behalf of the many brothers and sisters in the clan. Fu Qi's expression brightened. His ranking in the dragon race was near the bottom. After all, he only had a rank 6 bloodline. The Dragon Blood Flower was very useful to him. When he heard that the Dragon Blood Flower had been swept clean by Yang Kai, he hated Yang Kai to death. Without the Dragon Blood Flower, it would be harder for his rank 6 bloodline to improve. Even if the accumulation of time could purify his bloodline, it would take thousands or even tens of thousands of years. This kind of flowing time Great Emperor was a long time for the dragon race. Now that he heard that Yang Kai wanted to cultivate the Dragon Blood Flower, he was naturally overjoyed. As long as Yang Kai could recreate the scale of the Dragon Blood Flower, the old grudges were not worth mentioning. Yang Kai raised his hand and said, I can't guarantee if it will work, but I will try my best. Fu Qi said, the Great Elder said that the dragon descendants in the Half-Dragon City are under Brother Yang's command. If you need them, I can bring them over right now. Why would I need them? Yang Kai curled his lips. The Dragon Blood Flower on the Dragon Island had always been cultivated with the blood of the dragon descendants in the Half-Dragon City. The effect was very slow, and it would take a long time. Yang Kai was well aware of this. If it really worked, he could recreate the scale of the Dragon Blood Flower, but he didn't know how many years it would take. He rolled his eyes and asked, did the Great Elder say that the dragon race on the Dragon Island will also be under my command? Fu Qi was shocked. Brother Yang, you want to? Yang Kai said, since the Dragon Blood Flower needs to be cultivated with dragon blood, the effects of pure dragon blood should be better than those of the half-dragon bloodline. I see that Brother Fu Qi is full of energy, and your face is ruddy. It shouldn't be a problem for you to bleed a little. Why don't we start with you? As soon as he said that, Fu Qi's expression changed greatly. He took a few steps back and looked at Yang Kai with vigilance. No. Why not? Fu Qi said anxiously, the dragon race consumes the Dragon Blood Flower to improve their bloodline and increase the purity of their bloodline. If we really bleed to cultivate the Dragon Blood Flower, it will cause our bloodline to regress. It's not worth it. There's such a thing. Yang Kai was shocked. If that was the case, then wouldn't his bloodline regress if he bleed? Now that he used the dragon transformation art, he had a 300 Zhong dragon body. If his bloodline regress, wouldn't his half-dragon body become smaller? In an instant, Yang Kai had the thought of backing out. Although he wanted to make up for the losses of the dragon race and make Fu Qi speechless, if it really damaged his own interests and strength, he would definitely not do it. As if he sensed his thoughts, Fu Qi said, Brother Yang, you don't have to worry about your own problems. The Great Elder said that if it was you, it would definitely be different from the other dragon race members. Yang Kai looked at him from the corner of his eyes. How can the Great Elder be so sure? Fu Qi smiled and said, the Great Elder said so, but I'm not too sure. Yang Kai immediately became worried. Of course the Great Elder would say that to comfort him. Anyway, he was not a pure dragon race member. Whether or not his bloodline regress had nothing to do with the dragon race. The old man looked good, but he was actually as evil as the old witch. Seeing his gloomy face, Fu Qi knew that something was wrong. If Yang Kai really did not do anything, then it would be over. He immediately said, Brother Yang, if you feel that it's inappropriate, why don't you give it a try? If your bloodline is really damaged, then it's not too late to stop. With your senses, you should be able to clearly feel the situation of your own bloodline. Yang Kai's face became slightly better. He nodded and said, that makes sense. Let's not delay any longer. I'll give it a try now. Brother Yang, please. The two of them walked side by side into the Dragon Blood Island. Yang Kai was familiar with the place. The Dragon Blood Island was full of spiritual energy. It could be said that it was one of the spiritual islands with the richest spiritual energy in the entire Dragon Palace. After all, it was a place to cultivate the dragon blood flower. How could the spiritual energy not be rich? The entire spiritual island was also a strange dark red color. It was as though the island was bathed in fresh blood. Furthermore, the air was filled with a faint smell of blood. The smell of blood was not unpleasant. Instead, it had a strange fragrance. Strange formations could be seen everywhere. These formations were set up to extract the blood essence of the descendants of the dragon. When Li Jiao was brought here, he was locked in the formation. Then, when the formation was activated, the blood essence in Li Jiao's body was drawn out uncontrollably and used to nourish the dragon blood flowers growing on the island. Fortunately, Yang Kai had arrived in time, otherwise, Li Jiao's cultivation would have dropped. Even so, it was only after consuming some dragon blood flowers that he was able to recover and even improve his bloodline. It could be considered a blessing in disguise. Fu Qi accompanied by the side. He looked at Yang Kai and said, "Now, there are less than 100 dragon blood flowers left on the island. Furthermore, most of them are ungraded. Only a few are low-grade dragon blood flowers. If we want to recover them, we will need Brother Yang to put in more effort." He was furious. The culprit who caused this situation was right in front of him. Yet, the Great Elder sent a message to ask him to do his best to cooperate with him. What was the Great Elder thinking? Hearing Fu Qi's words, Yang Kai only nodded gently. He did not feel awkward at all. It was as though he did not know about this. The so-called ungraded dragon blood flowers were still in the growth stage and had not fully matured. Even if they were consumed, it would not be of much use. It would only be a waste of natural resources. Only the graded dragon blood flowers would have an effect on the bloodline of the dragon race. There were 4 grades: low grade, mid grade, high grade, and top grade. Among them, the top grade was the rarest. Yang Kai had picked 2 stalks last time. According to Fu Ling, the Great Elder and Second Elder had deliberately reserved them for themselves. They wanted to wait a few more days before consuming them. Who knew that they would benefit Yang Kai? After walking for a short while, Yang Kai stopped. He rubbed his hands together and said in a low voice, "Let's begin." He also wanted to know how effective his blood essence would be on the dragon blood flowers. His divine sense surged. With a flip of his hand, a stalk of dragon blood flower appeared on his palm. It was from the medicinal garden. Yang Kai had stolen so many dragon blood flowers last time. He did not have the time to consume all of them. He only consumed the top grade, high grade, and mid grade ones. He kept the low grade ones and transplanted them into his medicinal garden. The flower was red in color, as if it had been rolled in blood. It emitted a faint but pure dragon's aura. Fu Qi's breathing quickened. He said in a low voice, "Mid-grade dragon blood flower." Yang Kai was stunned. Mid-grade? How could it be mid-grade? He clearly remembered that he had consumed all of the mid-grade and above dragon blood flowers last time. Furthermore, he did not use them for alchemy. He had swallowed them whole. At that time was too tight. Although he had used the high-grade and top-grade ones for alchemy, he did not have the time to refine the mid-grade ones. Therefore, he did not have a single mid-grade dragon blood flower left. However, when he took a closer look, the dragon blood flower in his hand was undoubtedly a mid-grade one. After thinking for a while, Yang Kai immediately understood. His medicinal garden could be said to be the most beautiful place in the world. There was a precious treasure like heavy earth, many earth vein pearls, and the immortal tree beside it emitting vitality. Now, the entire world was providing him with an endless supply of spirit qi. A year of growth of the dragon blood flowers here was equivalent to 10 years in the outside world. It had already been more than 10 years since he left Dragon Island. In other words, these dragon blood flowers had grown for at least 100 years, or even 200 years. It was normal for them to grow from low grade to mid grade. "You're making a fuss over nothing." Yang Kai sneered. "Haven't you eaten a mid-grade dragon blood flower before?" Fu Qi smiled embarrassedly. "I only have a rank 6 bloodline. Normally, low-grade dragon blood flowers are enough. I can only occasionally obtain 1 or 2 mid-grade ones. I've embarrassed myself in front of Brother Yang." Chapter 33-38. The dragon blood flowers collected on the Dragon Island were all distributed according to a fixed amount. The quality of the dragon blood flower could be obtained based on the bloodline. It was not randomly distributed. For example, a rank 6 giant dragon like Fu Chi was only qualified to consume a low-grade dragon blood flower. Only after reaching rank 7 would one be able to consume a middle-grade dragon blood flower, and only after reaching rank 8 would one be able to consume a high-grade dragon blood flower. As for rank 10 bloodlines like the Great Elder and the Second Elder, they could only consume a top-grade dragon blood flower, because any dragon blood flower below the top grade did not have much effect on them. It would be a waste to force them to consume it. It would be better to give it to other dragon race members to increase their bloodline. Fu Chi had also lived for many years, but the number of mid-grade dragon blood flower he had consumed was no more than 10. Currently, there were only some low-grade and low-grade dragon blood flowers left on the Dragon Island. This mid-grade dragon blood flower was like a crane in a flock of chickens, attracting everyone's attention. Yang Kai had some understanding of this, so he did not say anything. Instead, he carefully transplanted the middle-grade dragon blood flower to an empty space in front of him. There was a hole left on the empty space. It was obviously left behind by Yang Kai when he stole the dragon blood flower last time. After that, Yang Kai rubbed his finger on his fingertip and made a small cut. He silently operated his secret art and a drop of golden blood dripped down the root of the dragon blood flower. Fu Chi opened his eyes wide and his breathing became rapid. He stared at the drop of golden blood without blinking. Yang Kai actually heard the sound of saliva being swallowed. He could not help but turn his head to look at him. "Brother Fu Chi, are you hungry?" "No, no, no." Fu Chi quickly waved his hand. He could not help but gulp. At first, Yang Kai thought that he was drooling over the middle-grade dragon blood flower. But when he took a closer look, he saw that he was actually staring at the cut on his finger. He immediately felt a chill run down his spine and put his hand behind his back. He thought to himself, "What the hell? Could it be that my blood essence is also useful for the male dragon race?" However, after thinking about it carefully, it wasn't strange that it was useful. Zhu Qing was able to upgrade her dragon bloodline from rank 8 to rank 9 because she had a close relationship with him. In other words, there was something in his body that could rapidly upgrade the dragon race's bloodline. His golden blood might really be effective against all the dragon race. This wasn't good. Yang Kai had a grudge. If that was the case, he wouldn't be captured by the dragon race, let out his blood, and then everyone would share it with him, right? It was fine to use his own blood to cultivate the dragon blood flower to compensate for the dragon race's losses, but if he really wanted the dragon race to drink his blood, Yang Kai was still a little hesitant. He waved his hand at Fu Chi and said, "All right, you can go. I can handle this place by myself, you don't have to accompany me." Based on his performance just now, how could Yang Kai dare to let him stay? Fu Chi was startled, "But my duty is to guard this place." Yang Kai looked at him sideways. "What's so good about guarding this broken island? It's just 100 or so dragon blood flowers. Do you think I can pick them all? You're talking as if you haven't picked them before." Fu Chi cursed in his heart, but he said, "Great Elder told me to. Are you leaving or not?" "If you don't leave, I'm leaving." "You're leaving? Where are you going?" Fu Chi was shocked. "The world is big, I'll go wherever I want." Fu Chi was shocked. "But Brother Yang, aren't you going to cultivate the dragon blood flower? How can you just leave like that?" Yang Kai sighed. "I had this idea, but there are always people who ruin my mood, so I'm not in the mood to do it now." Fu Chi's face turned red. He knew that his performance just now had made Yang Kai a little unhappy. Thinking about it, he actually showed a look of desire for his blood. It was really an instinctive reaction. He clearly knew that the drop of golden blood would be of great use to him. But since Yang Kai said this, Fu Chi could only say, "I'll have to ask Great Elder about this." "Quickly ask for instructions," Kai Yang urged, his face filled with impatience. Fu Chi immediately used a secret technique to communicate with Great Elder, but after a while, he said with a disappointed expression, "Great Elder said that there's no need to guard this place anymore." Yang Kai nodded. "Great Elder is reasonable." Fu Chi said helplessly, "If that's the case, then this Fu will leave first." Go, go. Yang Kai waved his hand. Fu Qi reluctantly looked at the mid-rank dragonblood flower that had just been transplanted, then turned around and flew away. He still felt a little regretful in his heart. If only he had consumed that drop of golden blood just now. Although he didn't know what it would do to him, it would definitely be more effective than consuming a dragonblood flower. After watching Fu Qi leave, Yang Kai's body and mind relaxed. He touched his chin and stood in place, quietly staring at the changes of the dragonblood flower. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the dragonblood flower seemed to have changed a little in just a short while. A layer of faint golden light flowed on the crimson flower, making it look very enchanting. After looking at it for a while, there seemed to be some changes, but there also seemed to be none. Yang Kai was also a little confused. However, since the dragonblood flower required dragonblood to grow, his golden blood should be very effective. After all, his bloodline was enough to suppress most of the dragon race on Dragon Island. Yang Kai didn't rush to transplant the other dragonblood flowers. He wanted to see how effective this one was first before making a decision. If it was useless, then there was no need to think about anything else. He could just go straight to the Dragon Palace and avoid suffering here. However, it wasn't a good idea to keep staring here, so Yang Kai simply wandered around the island. He had wandered around Dragon Blood Island once before, but at that time, all his attention was on searching for dragonblood flowers, so he didn't have the time to appreciate anything. This time, he took a good look. Apart from the dragonblood flower, there were also some other plants on Dragon Blood Island, but they weren't precious herbs. They were all ordinary plants. Moreover, it seemed that because the island was shrouded in dragon blood mist all year round, everything on the island had a crimson color, looking very strange. After looking at each other, Mu Zhu asked, "Master, is there something you need? I've encountered a bit of a problem here." Yang Kai still spoke softly, "I'm afraid I'll need your help." Mu Zhu was a little nervous, so she couldn't help but lower her voice and say, "If Master has something to tell us, we'll do it. There's no need to be polite." Although Mu Na didn't say anything, she also nodded her little head to the side. "That's good, but this matter shouldn't be difficult for you. The main thing is to cultivate a kind of spirit medicine." Mu Zhu smiled and said, "This is our strong point, but..." She turned her little head and looked around. "Why is Master saying this? Is there someone eavesdropping here?" Yang Kai blinked, clenched his fists, and coughed, finally returning to his normal voice. No, the main thing is that I'm afraid of disturbing the peace here." The two wood spirits were stunned by his words, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.